Well, welcome to the Church Safety Guys Facebook Live broadcast. My name is James, and I am with you guys this evening. Um, I will actually be joined here shortly by Paul. Paul Buckner and I are going to be talking about um, how much firepower is necessary with church safety teams. We're going to kind of dive a little bit into the firearm and also vest safety for tonight. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. First off, though, I do want to just mention the StreamYard. If you're looking at this from Facebook, if you click on the live view, go ahead and give StreamYard permission. What that does is it actually allows me to see who's watching. It kind of brings it into my broadcast studio because I'm in a special studio here on my computer. But if you if you bring StreamYard in or you give them permission, then it pops up and it'll show me and it'll tell me, okay, so and so made this comment or that sort of thing. So that kind of helps me out a little bit. And then as usual, if you get a chance, if you can just post where you're listening from, the church that you're attending, that would be great because that kind of gives us an idea, Paul and I, an idea of where things are going, who's listening, and how effective our ministry is. So to start off, we're gonna chat. Paul and I will chat in a little bit, but I actually had the opportunity to meet a gentleman by the name of Gary Lehman, and I kind of met him through actually talking on Facebook. The state of Ohio actually released a tabletop exercise, and that's been kind of floating around our group. And so Gary was nice enough to agree to come online with us tonight. So let me pull him in, and we'll chat with him a little bit about this. So here he is. Hey, Gary.
Hey, how are you, James?
I'm good. So I really appreciate you jumping in and joining us tonight. So if you would, I mean, we've dialogued. I know a little bit of your background, and um, I was kind of teasing you a little bit because you went to a different different college than I did, kind of like a college where we were always competing. But for those that don't know who you are, give us a little bit of your background and where you're at today.
Okay, so I'll start off with I started out in the military. So I spent 10 years in the Navy. In the Navy, I was a weather guesser. It's known as an areographer.
Sure.
That's where my emergency management passion kind of began because I was sent out to California. And if you want to be in this career field, California is unfortunately a great place to do it.
Sure.
So while I was there, I was in the Loma Prieta earthquake of '89 and the Oakland fire of '92. And then I left. I left out there and went out to Wisconsin, and that's where I got my bachelor's of science in theology. I actually trained to be a pastor.
Okay.
The same time I was going through my training, I went through OCS, got my commission in the Army, became a quartermaster, and then I got into logistics, and we moved out here to Ohio. And fast forwarding 12 and a half years, I had to go ahead and retire early. But before I left, I was involved as the supply and services officer for this small little hurricane called Katrina and Rita. So I, from Ohio, supplied our troops down in Louisiana and Memphis, or they'll hate me because I can't remember, Louisiana and Mississippi, from up here in Ohio. But that's when my passion started for emergency management. I have an associate of science in earth science. I have a bachelor of science in theology, a master of science in human services. But I really like I feel like it's my calling to do emergency management. So I started out as a volunteer. The the Southern Baptist, I did mud out, chainsaw, mass care or mass feeding, and then I was a disaster relief chaplain. Responded to tornadoes, and I think that you and I had talked about LSAP, life safety asset protection.
Yep.
Went down to another hurricane to do that through the Red Cross,
Sure.
and also involved in CERT, MRC, an auxiliary and law enforcement type organization. So all of those things was building so that I could actually go to work in emergency management at Ohio EMA. And that's where I ended up 2 years ago. And so with Ohio EMA, I'm an emergency or I'm a exercise design coordinator. And what that means is I design exercises for the state. We have radiological exercises. We have continuity of operation exercises. We have EOC, Emergency Operations Center. We have one of the best emergency operation centers in the United States. And those that are in emergency management know that all emergencies begin local and in local. So the way that emergency management is set up for the people that are listening is sometimes you have local EOCs, like a big city like Columbus, which is where I'm at, has an EOC for their actual city. And then we have 88 counties in Ohio. So each one of them has an emergency management agency. And then all the states have an emergency management agency, which is where I am. And then you have FEMA, which is above us. So it all moves up depending on how big the emergency is. So you wanted us to talk about the exercises. What's a tabletop? So there's 7 types of exercises. You have discussion-based exercises, which are seminars, workshops, tabletops, and games. Games usually happen in the military side of the house. Those are all discussion-based exercises. So this tabletop that I built is a discussion-based exercise. It's so that people can test their plans, policies, and procedures. The other exercises a lot of people know of are drills, functional exercises, and full-scale exercises, which is what most people think of. They see people out doing things with fire trucks and all the cool stuffs. But those are costly. Where a tabletop doesn't really cost anything. And so what we've done at the state of Ohio is so far we've built these 4 tabletops. We built one for businesses, which is continuity of operation or business continuity, and it has to do with a gas leak. You can modify it for any business. We did one for a mall active shooter. Then we did one, the last one I did was for higher education. And in that case, you have 2 people come on. They basically do damage on a campus, and then it's for colleges and universities. And then this last one, which is the one that I really had passion for, considering my background, I'm a person of faith, was this houses of worship. And it's houses of worship many times are a soft target. A lot of houses of worship, they don't have any form of protection. So what this tabletop is it gets the church leadership, sets them down, and in it, I'll go through the parts of this tabletop. Basically, it has a beginning part of it, which FBI and a bunch of different law enforcement organizations have been tracking these active shooters, and it doesn't have to be a gun. 25% of the time, like in this exercise that I developed, it's actually a sharp instrument. It could be a knife, a machete. We just saw that happened 2 weeks ago with the Jewish community up in New York City.
Sure.
So, you'd be surprised. It's not always a firearm that's used, but about 75% of the time it is. But anyway, so the FBI has been tracking this since 2000, and currently we don't have the 2019 statistics, but there's been 2,430 people injured and 884 killed. That's without and that's across the board. That's not just for houses of worship. Houses of worship constitute about 4% of the attacks. So in this toolkit, it has all the demographics. It has things on there like how to recognize aggressor. There's certain things, characteristics, the one that happened down in Texas, though they knew the individual, he came in a long coat, he had the weapon
Mhm.
underneath the long coat. Just has to do with the blank stare. There's a lot of things to look for. And so we developed this toolkit so that pastors or imams or rabbis or
Mhm.
whatever leader can look at what are the things that our house of worship needs, and do we have a team? Do we have an emergency action plan, emergency operation plan? Do we have some of the tools that are available? Do we have communication? Does our team exercise? And I know that you're in this business, and it's one thing to have CCWs, and then it's another thing to have a team that actually trains, because
Mhm.
it can be dangerous using firearms in a house of worship.
Sure.
So I didn't know if you wanted to break in here and ask any questions. I just been
Sure.
going.
No, you're that's perfect. I appreciate that. So I you know, I forget if it was you, or I'm not sure if it was you or David that posted in the group, or you were sharing that once that toolkit was released. Somebody shared the link, and I clicked on it,
Yeah,
and I started reading through it, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is sharp stuff. This is the type of stuff that." Um, I was just scratching my head about how realistic it was. And so, I kind of, at that point, that's when I know I reached out to you and David and emailed you guys and said, hey, for our area, for a larger church in Columbus, we in the past we've worked with the state of Ohio to facilitate meetings and different things like that. And so that's why I was like, hey, if any church, my initial thought was, if any church wants to jump into this as a group, then you guys are more than welcome to use our facility if we can work something out. But
okay.
as soon as I started reading it, to me, the crazy thing was I could see all of those things happening, and all of the examples of for scenarios and stuff. And it really pushed me to say to the folks at my church, hey, you know what, we need to sit down and run through this and talk about it, because some of the I don't know, it's when your adrenaline's running, when you're dealing with disaster, when you're dealing with that sort of thing, um, you like to think that you would respond a certain way.
Yeah,
And then when you look at it on paper and you think, I'm not sure how I would handle this, the general chaos, that you guys describe in that, or that you described in it, is just extremely accurate.
yeah,
So, as soon as I read that, I'm like, oh my goodness, this isn't just something. And I mean, I'm grateful that you guys have the resources with the state of Ohio to do that. That, currently there was that much of a priority put on it. And I know Senator Portman and Governor DeWine have been pushing that a lot, which is really cool. But the more I started looking at it, the more I just thought, you know what, this is awesome, but it's not just for churches in Ohio. This could
yeah,
be practically used anywhere for any church, that just wants to sit down and have, a good conversation about stuff that really could happen. And I think for me, it just kind of opened my eyes a little bit to say, you know what, this is pretty accurate, and this is the world we're living in. So what, I guess I'll throw a question your way. What made you come up with that type of crazy scenario? Is it just from being in places of worship yourself, or what was the foundation for your thought there?
well, to be honest, there was a couple of reasons. So the first one is, since the higher education and the mall one use firearms, um,
Mhm.
I was basically instructed by David, that it would be David being my supervisor for those that are listening, that I needed to use a sharp instrument. So in this scenario, this one's actually using basically a machete and using some improvised explosives.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be modified. So the other part of that equation is I did my research. So I
Sure.
started. There's a gentleman up in the northern part of the state. He's actually referenced in here. His last name is Chen. He's been researching this. He was actually on Focus on the Family and Family Talk now,
Mm-hmm.
because Dobson has changed the name of it to Family Talk. And he was both in the he was actually in two incidents in a church, both in Colorado. One with the Focus on the Family, and the other one, I think it was Youth with a Mission.
Uh-huh.
Um, and he was in both of those situations. And so then he started collecting data. So then I started looking at the data that's available, and then I found out that it actually does happen with knives. That there are attacks in churches. There's been attacks up in New York City on priests with knives. There's been attacks in some
Mm-hmm.
evangelical churches with knives. And then, of course, we saw recently, right after I did this, that we saw, even though it started next to the temple, synagogue, it was connected, and the assailant tried to get into the synagogue. So it does happen with machetes these days. But my tabletop, it's changeable. So for those
Mm-hmm.
listening, the tabletop has everything you need in it. And when I say tabletop, it's the exercise, the discussion-based exercise. It has the facilitator, because that's how a tabletop is run. You have a person who facilitates the exercise, which basically goes through the scenario step by step, asks the question. You have a scribe that writes down the answers. You have a participant manual that gives you all the information about the exercise itself. You have the PowerPoint visual that it goes through the stuff I've been talking about, the pre-exercise, which gives all the data from FBI. Then it goes through the 3 phases of scenario. And then it has like a hot wash at the end, because you
Mm-hmm.
want to, when you go through any exercise, you capture the data, but then you want to, what do we do now? What do we do now? What's the way forward? What are we going to do with the material that we just captured in with this exercise? And what are we going to build? What are we going to change? Things like that. The other things in this toolkit, it has even the name tents, it has the sign-ins, it has the things to
Mm-hmm.
run the meetings. Everything is there, and it's free. You can modify it. You can change a scenario. You can turn it into a gun situation. The big thing is getting people talking about what happens when we have someone come into this house of worship and is trying to do harm to the worshipers.
Mm-hmm.
So, and
No.
I did a generic, I did it so that any house of worship, um, so that any denomination, any religion can actually use it. So,
Yeah, it's definitely I don't know. I think you guys did a fantastic job with it. So I definitely appreciate you putting the time and energy into it, because like I said, to me, when I first opened it and started looking through it and reading it, um, my thought was, this is right, like for any church, for anybody, this is right on the money, as far as, okay, this is stuff that could happen. And again, for me, I kind of took the information and I started reviewing it, and I'm actually at the point of trying to plan a date for my safety team, to come in and sit down, so that we can talk about it. We have been blessed for a long time, at our church, that um, we've had leadership that have been very strong with having a safety team and supportive of that. But I know there are a lot of churches, a lot of places of worship, that have come into this group over time, certainly because of things that happen, out in the
yeah,
U.S. But then, not everybody that comes into this group would be a typical non-denominational Christian, Baptist, whatnot.
yeah,
We have a lot of different denominations that are involved with the group. But for me, just being able to sit down and look at that and say, you know what, we really need, we have policy, we have plans, but we really need to sit down for and specifically think about some of the things that you've brought up and you've mentioned in that, for the churches that don't have supportive leadership. I think it's an awesome tool to be able to take to their leadership and say, look, the state of Ohio is saying, hey, along with the FBI and everybody else, everybody's saying, kind of like trumpeting, the same story, which is, you guys need to wake up and you need to realize that a house of worship isn't safe anymore. It's a soft target.
Yeah.
And what can we do to make this better? And of course, I've grown up in church most of my life. I've been a pastor at different roles in different places, and served in ministries and stuff. And if you had told me, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, that I would be sitting here, trying to funnel stuff to churches and talk to people like yourself, I would have said, forget about it. But
yeah, it's the day and age we live in. I mean, it's been happening. There have been attacks on churches outside of the United States.
sure.
And the first one that I think of was back in the 60s, the firebombing that killed the African American girls in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but it's happened throughout history, but there's an uptick with it happening now. And some of it's, like I did run a bunch of different data. Some of it's domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
There's been disputes in the pews. Best friends, and all of a sudden one shoots the other one. I mean, there's just violence sometimes.
Sure.
And the better we're prepared, the better that we're able to mitigate. I look at Texas 2 weeks ago. Though 2 people died, it could have been worse. And
Sure.
from the video I saw, it was over in 6 seconds. And the first gentleman who was addressing him, he was armed. He just could not draw his weapon in time. So it could have been a little bit different. I think I lost you. Did I lose you? It's frozen on my side, James. Oh. I don't know if everybody can see me still. If you can, I'm still here. But I think we lost James. Oh, I see him go back. I didn't know if I was supposed to do a song and dance while you came back or what.
Oh my goodness. My computer just completely shut down on me and locked me out.
I didn't know if I was still in it, so I didn't want to do anything strange.
You're fine. It did. It actually that's funny. It looks like it came back and everything's good. Oh my goodness. You gotta love technology.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. So what were you saying? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't remember now.
Okay.
Oh, I was talking about Texas.
Yes.
And that team actually trained.
Sure.
I don't know if you've already discussed the Texas incident, the most recent one down in White Settlement.
Yes.
Texas. Okay.
We spent probably about 2 hours. We did a 2-hour broadcast, and what was interesting to me about it was that we were, whenever something's in the news, it's kind of Paul and I kind of feel honored that we get to do this, because we feel like it's a ministry. We feel like we're blessed that that God has grown this group, and that we're sitting here and people actually listen to what what we have to say. But this was the first time in probably since we've been doing this group, that individuals were literally like almost, I don't know, by the hour messaging us, and they're like, "Hey, what do you guys think of the white settlement thing? What could have been done? What happened? What do you think? What's your take on it?" And so, I mean, honestly, Paul and I prayed about it for a long period of time, because it's always easy to sit back, right, and to say, "Well,
Yeah.
it it should have been this way, should have done that, they should have done that way." In reality, I have reached out to Mr. Wilson to ask him if he would come on. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. I think that him and the pastor, I think that they saved a lot of lives. And
Yeah.
so when I look at that now, my takeaway, I've sat down with the folks at my church, and I've said, okay, I think that this is a wake up call, that they did this and that, so we need to push ourselves a little bit further. We need to train better. um, you know from a firearm standpoint, that shot that he took, I mean, I've taught firearms for probably the last 11 years, and that shot was $1 million shot. I mean, to me, and I've had people ask me about it, but to me, I'm like, that was a David and Goliath thing,
Yeah.
where I would almost say that God steadied his hand, and yes, he practiced and he trained, but under the circumstances, he was able to rise, to addressing that situation. But as we've talked about it at length, my church leadership, we've kind of sat down and chatted about it. But I tell people all the time that things are going to get worse before they get better. We know that, right? We have the source of information, and at the end of the day, you know as we try and reach out to the community, as we do the best we can to serve the community and to lift up those that maybe are homeless, or maybe are in disputes, or different things like that, there's no choice but to absorb some of those conflicts and bring those into the church. And so, as we're serving now, people handle aggression and such in such a different way.
Yeah.
It's like, years ago, it used to be, well, if you had a problem with somebody, you talk to them. The church property, or the place of worship property, was sacred. You don't take stuff like that in. And now, we're just seeing all over places of worship that they're like, well, yeah, it's okay to bring this stuff in. Or you see people, stand up while a pastor's preaching in the middle of his sermon to comment about some controversial topic. And it's like, what what does that accomplish? It's not accomplishing what you think it should be accomplishing. But I don't know, I've had a good friend of mine, actually, as a pastor in Central Ohio, and I've mentioned this scenario on here before. But he preached one Sunday. He preached against abortion. That was something he was very passionate about, and he didn't want, biblically, he was sharing. He was preaching on that. 2 weeks later, he actually had a gentleman come in to the church, and his safety team actually saw this guy, because I guess they had a balcony, so they were watching. And this guy was moving his way across a set of chairs towards this pastor who was sitting there with his family. And he kept moving forward. So finally, they moved, or a safety team member went and sat down between the pastor's family and this gentleman. And at one point, the safety team then saw that he had pulled a knife with a 3-inch blade out of his pocket, and he's sitting in the service, listening, playing with this knife. And so then the safety team was like, okay, we're done, grab him, let's go. Why do you have this knife? And so they took him out. They called the police. Several of the safety team members were officers. local officers. So,
Yeah.
they brought him out. And basically, when they started talking to him after a while, he finally confessed that the reason that he had brought a knife in, he didn't know exactly what he was going to do with the knife, but he was mad at the pastor because 2 weeks before the pastor had taught against that or preached against abortion, and his present fiance or girlfriend had one quite a few years ago. So instead of looking for help and trying to deal with the hurt and the pain in his life, he grabs a knife and comes to church and immediately is doesn't know what he's going to do, but he's going to do something.
Yeah.
And that to me, that's the type of thing that when we look at it, it's people are hurting, people are suffering, and the reality is, as long as we're here and we're called in ministry of serving and serving in our local communities, we have to be aware of that. There's no two ways about it anymore.
Yeah.
And
So I hope that this toolkit is downloaded. Right now, we're nearing 1,000 in a week and a half. So I'm hoping that it goes tenfold that. I haven't sent it out. I plan on sending it out to certain denominations that I can get a hold of, certain other religious groups that I can get a hold of to their headquarters, so they can spread it out to their houses of worship.
sure,
So that everybody, I would love to see well, it would be crazy to think that everybody in the United States is going to download it. We have had it downloaded twice outside of the United States, but I think now that we've had, I'm wanting to say 40 or 80%. I think 80% of the states have downloaded out of those 1,000. I don't know if we're at 100% of all the states, but that'll usually happen. All the other
sure.
toolkits. This one now is actually trending stronger than the other three. So this one will probably far exceed the other three toolkits that we have. And there's three more that we will be releasing they're for K through 12. They were built by Cuyahoga Emergency Management, just so that your folks will know in case they're in if they're in through K through 12 schools, or it can even be used for Christian schools. One's going to be a hazmat situation near a school. The other one's severe weather, which we just had severe weather last night.
Sure.
And then the other one will be another active aggressor in a school type, a K through 12 environment instead of the higher education one. So those three, look for them in the next month and a half. You'll see those go out there as well. And then, there's other ones I'd like to build. I'm afraid that some of the stuff that's in my head, that if I build it, it might give people ideas. so it's a good thing that the people who are in emergency management, sometimes it's good that they're on the good side, not the bad, because there's things that keep me up at night that I'm like, oh man, I hope this never happens. That I know that we're vulnerable in the United States. And
Mhm.
I'd love to build a toolkit for it, but I don't want any ideas out there. So
I think honestly, and I think as a general rule, a lot of our folks, a lot of the folks that serve in this ministry have a veteran background, and a lot of times that's what I've seen, where they've come from veterans, emergency management, law enforcement, municipal services, etc. And it's interesting because that one thread of I guess commonality with everybody is that you know our we've seen through our lives, we've seen the worst of the worst. So when we think about stuff, we always tend to go, at least I do. I'm like, okay, so what happens with that? What happens with that vehicle? We see all the times now that or all the time now, all over the U.S., people are driving vehicles into places of worship, and it's an accident, or at least it's being conveyed as an accident. And
yeah,
so, that's another thing that I think about, and I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, what? That's there's so yeah, I definitely understand what you mean when you say stay up at night thinking about this stuff.
Well, all Army officers and many of the other branches too, we're taught threat assessments. So
Sure.
we're always doing, risk assessments, threat assessments. But my dad worked for the railroad and he did safety. So I grew up always thinking about, okay, what could go wrong? I always had plan Bs, plan C. So it was instilled in me as a child because I was always thinking about, okay, what could be the worst that could happen? What can go wrong? I grew up
Sure.
around, yeah. So,
Well, we have already, one of the other folks that helps me here has already posted the link. So
okay,
that's definitely available if somebody else wants to download it or take a look at it.
I appreciate
And
it.
um, you know, we have a lot of schools, a lot of church schools, or place of worship / schools that I know tune into this too. So hopefully, when
Okay.
you guys get that out, we can share that link and um, get that out there. So
Yeah, and let me know when you're doing your next church safety event at your church, and I'll come in.
I appreciate it. That's definitely good to know. All right, sir. I will let you go. Thank you so much for your time. It was great chatting with you,
Thanks,
and
brother.
stay blessed.
Yeah, you too. Good
Thanks.
night.
Good night. All right, guys. So I'm gonna try and patch Paul in here if I can get my computer up and running. So Paul and I are gonna try and chat a little bit tonight about bringing enough firepower to the fight, and something that we've both done a lot of research on and a lot of discussion. So let me see if I can bring him back in and if he can get his computer fired up. So a lot of times we've been asked, or in the past we've been asked, what type of firearm is the best firearm to use. I've had people message me and ask me about body protection or body armor, and how we're gonna use that, and what the best way to use that is, and if that's necessary. Um, so as soon as let me see here, as soon as I pull Paul back in here, just waiting for him, then we'll go ahead and get started on that. So what I will do, actually, I can start chatting about the. I'm gonna have Paul join me a little bit when we talk about firearms. And oh, wait a second, he's here. Here, just waiting for him. Then we'll go ahead and get started on that. So what I will do, actually, I can start chatting about the. I'm gonna have Paul join me a little bit when we talk about firearms. And oh, wait a second, he's here. Here, just waiting for him. Then can you hear me, Paul? Started on that.
I can hear you.
So what I will do, actually, I can start chatting about the. You're getting a little bit of feedback.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. How's the lag?
I'm not getting any at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, you sound great. And I think we both look pretty decent on the screen. I mean, based on my looks and the background, I think I look okay. But we're not blurry. Let me try that again. We seem to be in focus.
Cool. All right, sir. So you want to start with body armor? You want to start with firearms, holsters?
Well, I was thinking about that because the one that's going to take the most time is going to be firearms. So I was going to say, why don't we start with like maybe body armor and jump to holsters?
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
All right. So for those of you that have considered having body armor, or that you have in the past, you've kind of messaged us and said, "Hey, what do I do about this? Should I wear stuff? Should I not wear stuff?" I can tell you there's pretty much three types of body armor. There's what we call plate carriers that are what we see like military folks use mostly. There is an external vest, and then there is I kind of call it an internal vest, but what it is it's designed to wear under your clothing. Okay, there are different types, different levels, and I'm not going to go through each level tonight. Some states actually require a certain level of protection. I think the average standard state protection is probably a, I think it's measured at what they call a 3A level, which typically will stop anything up to a 357 round, or it's supposed to stop or deflect that. But again, there are rounds that can be used above that, like a 223, 556, a couple of pistol rounds that will penetrate that. So, is it really worth the money? Well, I have two. I actually have two vests, and one it's pretty thick. I wear under, like I can wear under my shirt, and then I brought the other one out here. I don't know if you can see that. This is actually the one that goes over like what I'm wearing, and this is actually a bullet safe vest, which I think usually runs about $299, and this is actually 3A rated. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's actually a flap in the front, so I could put like what we call a trauma plate, and what that'll do is just give me extra protection if I wanted it. Now, typically, I can wear something like that and throw a coat on, and most people don't pay as much attention as you think they do, or they think they do. So the reality is, in a lot of cases, I can throw that on. It's pretty quick. I'm ready to go. And then if something's going on, and I know about it ahead of time, a lot of times I'll wear the one that goes under my shirt. So which one's the best one for you? Well, that kind of depends on the one you're most comfortable with. I probably have worn the bullet safe one more, but part of the reason is because I've taught gun classes and we've done shooting. I've shot on the range and stuff like that. So I like pulling it out and throwing it on when I'm doing that. Is it pricey? Yeah, $299 for a vest isn't bad. That's actually probably the low end. You can get some cheaper other places, and usually I think a plate carrier is usually between 150 and 250, depending on the thickness, what you want to do, that sort of thing. I would say probably if you're thinking about getting one or you're considering getting one, chat with some local law enforcement and see if maybe you can borrow one for like a week and just try it, because it's one of those things that when I bought one and I started wearing it, I didn't realize it was that heavy. That sounds really stupid, but when you're practicing, and I'm just going to put my hands out here, when I put my hands out to shoot and I'm gripping a gun, what I don't realize, or what I didn't realize until I started wearing the vest, was that because it bunches up under your sides and your arm, when you push forward to actually engage or shoot, it feels entirely different, and you actually have to push further out because you're fighting this vest that's trying to be constricting towards you.
Yep.
So from that standpoint, I'm not opposed to them. I think having some kind of protection.
Hey, James, let me grab this really quick.
Yeah.
I got to take a little minor emergency. I'll be gone just a couple minutes. I'll be right back.
No, you're cool.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Sure. He's doing his thing. So anyhow, as far as vests go, I think something is better than nothing. If you want to if you know of an imminent threat and you want to throw it on and wear it. But it is the type of thing, if you decide that, hey, I'm going to wear this, Yeah, Michael just posted 22 pounds for the average plate carrier. That's a lot. That's a lot of extra weight. So when you factor that in, it is something that I would say to folks, if you were planning on getting one and using it, go to the range and try and shoot how you would normally with it, um, and just try and get a little bit more comfortable wearing it before you commit to, every Sunday I'm going to wear this regardless of what's going on and that sort of thing. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I like to keep it with me. So when I go to different places, when I go teach a class, or if I'm at church, a lot of times I'll throw it, in my truck with me, so I have it and it's right there. The problem or the opportunity that I see with that is that while I am, putting it there for quick access, if something happens, I don't know that I would have the time to stop what I'm doing, run out, grab it, throw it on, and then be good to go. So that's definitely something that you guys, when you're considering it, need to think about. Most interactions where we've seen firearms used, or active shooters or something like that, they're typically done within 5 to 6 minutes. And we've seen you know the Jack Wilson thing. That whole thing was done in seconds. So would you actually have time at that point to throw something on and engage somebody? I don't know, probably not. And that's why, for me, I kind of lean towards the vest that goes under my shirt, because it doesn't add a whole lot of bulk, and it kind of helps, I think, protect me a little bit more, and I don't have to think about it. I've gotten to the point where I'm used to it, and I can jump in and use it or be ready to go right away. So probably the only thing that you need to know about vests in general is that they do have an expiration date. Now, certain entities, I know, like municipal services, the government, etc., after a certain date, after the expiration date, they won't use it anymore. That's kind of their thing. I don't know. I don't know exactly if that's because it starts deteriorating. I imagine it's because it starts deteriorating. To me, again, even if it expired, I would probably still want to have something on, because I feel like something's better than nothing. But with the expiration date, that is something, if you're buying one used or you find one used, the ones that go under your shirt are more tailored to your body structure. And there is guys versus gals. So if you happen to find somebody that's selling one that's used, you could get a good deal out of it, but it could be expired. So, that's something, check to see if the date's still on it. And then you kind of have to decide for yourself if that's something you're comfortable with, if it is expired, and say, okay, well, I'm going to wear this. Could it stop the bullet? It might not. But then again, not having anything might not too. So let me bring Paul back in here. Are you good, sir?
Yeah, a little minor emergency in the family. So if you would keep one of my loved ones in prayer, I'll talk to you more about it later. But it's one of those things. I think it's going to be good in the end. I saw the message come through and went, I should probably handle this. I should probably deal with this. So
Sure.
the only thing I can think of, because I missed part of what you said, but I caught up enough at the end of it that I was tracking, is you were talking about shooting and pushing out and it putting pressure. It affects the way you sit. It affects where your gun sits on your belt. I didn't think about the fact that to draw from like 3 or 4 o'clock, it's going to be pushing down on it. This is why a lot of soldiers and SWAT guys wearing hard armor, they actually wear drop leg. It affects a lot of little things. And then the other thing that I've come into contact with, I do a lot of chaplain work with police departments. So I wear a coyote tan vest. They're hot. They're heavy. You get really sweaty in them. They're annoying. And then the other thing that I've noticed with them is people in our culture right now are kind of freaked out by public displays of body armor. I was at a store. There had been a shoplifting event, and I was asked while the officer was up front taking a report. I'm there to help, so I'm not there to try to look pretty, because that would be terrible. That would just be an epic fail. But I'm not there just to look pretty. So I had headed to the back, and somebody was going to give me a flash drive with the footage. And a guy was walking through this little store and saw me wearing body armor and freaked out. And I mean, I'm just walking. I'm like, "How are you doing?" He's like, "Why are you wearing body armor?" I was like, "I'm riding with such and such town tonight. I'm their chaplain." And he was like, "Right, but why are you wearing body armor?" Because if somebody tries to shoot the cop, I would like to not die. And he's like, "Where's the cop?" I mean, he was just completely freaked out. This was before white settlement. This was, I think, post Sutherland Springs. It's been in the last 2 years. And so the only caution I would have, and you're very smart about this as well, because we can talk from experience. Oddly enough, we both were in body armor. There's an idea in the sheepdog community that we're going to run out to our truck, we're going to grab our truck gun, we're going to throw our hard armor on, and we're going to put our helmet on, and it's going to be, we've got all of our patches on there, and we're going to run and save the day. Well, first and foremost, in my opinion, defensive shootings are pretty much come as you are. You're in the store, you're in the church, you don't get to go times tweet and run out to your truck and have time. I've centered myself, okay, and run back. We don't have that time. Sure. And so for one, odds are if we are not going to get a warning. The bad guy not going to call and go, "Hey James, is Sunday morning about 9:15 good for you?" I was thinking about rolling by with a couple of the boys, little shootout in the church foyer. It doesn't work that way. And sure. I mean, I'm being a smart aleck, but I've had friends that have had this idea that they're going to beat feet out and grab the 7.62 out of the truck. And no. And then number two, in most of those situations, you're probably going to draw fire in a situation like that. If you can get clear, protect people. And I've really gone through a lot of soul searching because I'm not a runaway kind of guy. I'll go in without the armor before I'll run out to the truck and get the armor and go back, because I'm afraid I couldn't live with myself going, the armor that I have, did that cost 3 people their lives? So that's one aspect, in my opinion, and I want your thoughts in a moment. And then the other aspect is, I've actually had a couple of circumstances, and I know you have too, where I have gotten a heads up. We had a lady, she texted my wife, as I recall, and she and her husband had gotten into it, and he had gotten strung out on medication. And this was one of those worst case scenarios. He had written his name on a bullet. He'd put it up on a shelf. I'd had a very serious talk with him. He was about this close to getting committed. And if it was, this was quite a few years ago, if I had it to do over again, I would have just called the sheriff's department and had him committed. But he had a 12-gauge shotgun, had access to it, and a couple of handguns. And he was going to drive his wife to church, and they were very angry with each other, and he was just going to drop her off. And she was like, "I'm not sure what he's going to do." And so now, knowing what double-aught buck would do to Class 3 armor, it was kind of not really even worth throwing on. But I had a big suit jacket on, and I went out to my car, and I put over the vest, and this is a soft, that Coyote Tan Class 3. And I think it was slightly placebo in effect against a 12-gauge, but it made me feel better. And then I put my jacket on over it, and then I stood in a position where, and I had some solid concrete that I had legit cover even from double-aught buck. I've had a couple other scenarios where we've had some high-threat things that I've worn a vest. But in my opinion, in our line of, I want to say work, in our line of ministry, most of the time as church safety, we're not going to have time to run out and put a vest on. You either brought it in and you're already wearing it concealed, or you're not. So
yeah, and that's exactly why you were gone. That's exactly what I said, actually, which was kind of funny. They are hot, they are sweaty, and that's what I said. Honestly, you can rewind the feed, or Mike for me, because I know he's on. But yeah, you're not going to always have the time, and considering the length of time that things like that normally happen, I don't know. I don't think it's a bad investment, but like you said, I think the other thing that we miss sometimes too is, if I wear a vest, a lot of times I'll throw a coat on over it or something and kind of zip it up, so most people don't think that I'm actually wearing a vest.
You just look impressive.
Yep. But what's funny about it is that people do notice that, and people do say, "Oh, why are it's kind of like, why are you wearing that? What Yeah. And joking around, I've had people come up to me and like, start, oh, can I punch you? No, you can't punch me. They're like, well, but I want to feel it. It hurts just as much like it would if
Yeah.
you punch me without it. But I think a lot of times, I think it kind of gives us a false sense of, because we see the movies. So we think, oh, it's real easy to just throw this on. And because Hollywood's never wrong, right? So, but yeah, as far as the firearm piece goes, I can definitely understand now why, and a lot of times, infantry or paramilitary type situations, the guys will have holsters on the actual plate because to me it's like you're absolutely right. If you're wearing a vest and it gets caught in your holster, then it's pushing down on your holster, and you're like trying to draw and do all these things. And that's why I said, if it's something that you're really convinced that you want to do and wear and get, practice with it beforehand, because the last thing you want to do is to have to take time and throw something on and then kind of trying and be prepared for a threat, and then you're dealing with all of that and the uncomfortness of it's hot, it's sweaty. It is easier in the wintertime because just like carrying is easier in the wintertime because you can layer, right? So I can put a vest on and then a sweatshirt and not be as noticeable, but it does draw attention, and it's kind of like, to a certain extent, I think it's kind of like open carrying. You kind of have to decide if you really want that type of attention or not, based on the situation that you're in, and kind of go from there. So the next thing that we're going to jump into real quick, I've had a few folks ask me about holsters, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Buckner for a second about firearms. So in the past, I've had people ask me a lot of times, what type of holster do you use, that sort of thing. Typically I try and stay with like a level 2 type holster, level 2 restraint. Typically there's three levels of restraint as well. A lot of times police departments will have their own specific level. But typically what I use, when I talk about carrying, I typically carry a Glock 23, which is a 40 caliber, 13 round. I said 40 caliber, 13 round firearm, semi-automatic pistol. It's just one of my favorite guns to shoot. But this is the holster that I use. It's actually a gold Glock 19. They're interchangeable holsters, but you can kind of see that it's a belt holster. It rides on my belt, and then it has a leather strap where that's snapped over the action, so that if I want to draw it or I want to use it, I have to pop the snap, and then I can draw it and use it. Part of the reason, and I train with this holster, like when I go to shoot, I practice drawing and shooting with this, so that I'm used to unsnapping it, pulling it out, and shooting. But I also have an Uncle Mike's. Just kidding. No. I actually have a Safariland retention level 2 holster again for the same firearm, and the difference here is it doesn't have the strap. It actually is a paddle, so it rides pretty nicely. And then I don't know if you can see it or not on the side here. It goes in and it locks, so there's a lever that you can push on, and as you're pulling the firearm out, that releases. Now, I mean, people go around and around. I've had people try and get into arguments with me about, well, any type of restraint holster, what happens if the restraint breaks, or the bar breaks or the button breaks or something like that. I get it. Probably my favorite, like I said, the leather one is probably my personal preference or favorite. But the reason that I choose to do some sort of retention is because a lot of times I'll be going through like the kids areas, or because we do first aid too. If I'm kneeling on the ground and trying to take care of somebody, I don't want a child or somebody coming up behind me and trying to pull it out while I'm there. I don't always. I mean, I always try and, for the most part, keep it concealed in dress and on Sundays. But I know there are some times when I'm doing things like if I'm kneeling on the ground that my jacket could be not concealing it. So if I can't always be there and be focused on it, then, I want something there holding it to me so that nobody can come up behind me and grab it. And when we do training, I've seen in a lot of the tactical, and I've done training before, but I've seen a lot of people encourage like the tactical open top type holster, where it kind of posi locks in and doesn't have any restraint, and you can just pull it out. I don't have a problem with those, but as far as holsters go, I would probably caution you, because you can get a lot closer to somebody than you think they can. And when we're doing training and stuff like that, I have guys that mess around with me, and thankfully I know they're messing around with me, but they'll walk up to me and just pull it just to see. And it's not loaded. Usually I'd have like a blue pistol or something in there, but just to prove a point, if somebody gets close enough to you, or you're in a fight with them, or you're wrestling or whatever, it's very easy to reach down and pull out something that's not secured.
Yeah.
Or, if you are jogging across the parking lot because something's going on, whee, there goes, there goes your holster and your, $900 Kimber or whatever. So my biggest thing is, you don't have to break the bank to buy a holster. Get something that's comfortable, that you're okay with, practice with it. But make sure that you're getting something quality that will actually hold your firearm. We've joked around in the past about Uncle Mike's being of lesser quality, because it's a cheap neoprene kind of cover. It's not really even a holster. It kind of holds them, but I don't know. I've had friends tell me, well, if you don't spend 30% of what you spent on that gun in a holster, it's not worth it. And just like everything else, I'm like, well, I mean, I've always said, as I've progressed with firearms as a hobby, that I would never have a closet full of holsters.
Oops.
Yeah, guess what? I have a closet full of holsters. And part of that is because, you do things different. I mean, if I'm running to the store or working around my house or something like that, a lot of times I'll use an in the waistband holster that just kind of clips to my belt, and I've practiced with it. I know it's secure and I'm good to go. I'm not crazy about using those at church. Part of the reason is because for me, I just like it sitting higher on my belt versus down lower than my belt, because it's easier for me to reach down and grab it. But for what it's worth, that's just my 2 cents on the topic. So
I like your perspective, and there's a couple things, because leather's beautiful. Of course, this, and you keep your leather up, but there are people that will have a leather holster that maybe is a family heirloom that's been passed down to them, and they want to continue to carry it. Without a leather strap, or without the strap and the clasp at the top of it, a lot of leather holsters have zero retention. There's actually better friction than an Uncle Mike's, than a nylon holster, but it'll actually come out very easily. Number two, your training, which I love, your training to defeat, probably with your thumb on the way down, you're defeating that snap that's holding the top of that holster on, which if a lot of people don't practice. So and this is where the Uncle Mike's thing just drives me nuts, is I was in the last week, I've seen 2 people in person carrying, both of them carrying and Uncle Mike's, and one of them had it on a he had it was a clip holster that's designed to go onto your belt, and it fits over your belt and comes underneath your belt, so it comes underneath and locks. And he was carrying it clipped on the side of his pocket, which means it was the strap was snapped, so if he goes like this, he's holding the gun and the holster because it's not actually hooked to anything that will hold the holster. So not only, and this is one of those things that I get Forrest Whitaker eye, like one eye starts turning in and I start like, it just drives me nuts because he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And God bless him. I pray for these guys because a lot of times, and I do open carry on occasion, but I open carry nicely dressed. I open carry for very specific reasons. Sometimes on security details, I'll open carry. But I also have some hand-to-hand skills, and I have a really strong situational awareness game. And I literally watched a guy the other day walk up to a counter and lean over the counter and talk to this lady, and he was leaned over so far that I could have walked up and literally unsnapped his holster, drawn his gun, and clubbed him with it and walked off with his gun. So the fact that you train to defeat your leather strap is awesome, and that's the key part of it is you've trained under someone to know what you're doing, and then you practice what you've trained. Mm-hmm. And then number two, you make sure your leather's in good shape because you've seen this, but leather and even the Uncle Mike's holsters will do this. They'll get where they flop. So if this is looking down into the holster and they begin to wear, you get this wear pattern going, and then one day you shove your pistol in, and part of the leather or the Uncle Mike's soft nylon folds up into the trigger guard, and bang, you have a negligent discharge down the side of your leg, and you're probably screaming in agony. And we've all seen those terrifying photos or listen to guys talk about that. Leather has a shelf life. Mm-hmm. Now, I have some leather holsters that I've had for years, but I clean them and I keep them nice, and they're more for show. So I love the fact that you have a type of retention with your leather holsters, because I've seen the guys that have none. And leather, unless like 1791 does some amazing leather holsters that mm-hmm. actually have retention. I actually have a couple of them. They were gifts, or one of them was a gift, and I bought one. They're very nice. And one of the holsters I have is actually a 3-way holster. You can actually set it up cross draw, which is not my thing. You can do it on the waistband or in the waistband. And then Kydex is my baby. That's my thing. And the fact that you have Kydex that has some kind of retention, I generally carry retention. And then I wanted to give a quick story about why the and help me out with the term for these, because the police grade, like the Safariland, they are, what's the class that they call those? It's a something level retention. Level 3, level 4.
I think Safariland is level 2.
Level 2. Okay, well, so there's different levels, and this is something that sure. You guys, you guys watching at home playing the home game can go online and research this. But level 2 and level 3, I think, are what a lot of the law enforcement ones are. Somebody on here is going to be law enforcement and going to go, yes, or you're crazy. But the fact that you have to defeat something to get it drawn actually saved a friend of mine from getting shot, probably in the back. And it was a situation that went south in a hurry. It was supposed to be a welfare check on a child. Somebody was refusing to let him in the door. And he's like, look, it's the law. I have to check on this child. And it was a pretty credible situation. And this guy went to go hands-on with him and grapple with my friend who's in law enforcement, being the important part of it. And he all of a sudden felt his right hip going and getting jerked up while he's wrestling with this guy. And he looks back, and there's like a 14-year-old kid is trying to jerk his pistol out of the holster. Mm-hmm. And he said, if I had not had, and it was one of these where there was a thumb depress, and then you have to move your hand a certain way to actually defeat the holster. And he has trained, and again, train and then practice is what's important. He has trained and then practiced hundreds of times. He can do it, and it's in his hand. It is such muscle memory that he doesn't even have to think about it. And we want to train until we can't get it wrong. And so what you said is so important about being able to bend over in a holster. I was in a situation, I was surrounded by friends. It was an environment that should have been a safe environment. And a guy was there who was a goober smooch. And that's my special word for people that aren't all that bright. And he reached out with his foot, and I was squatted down on my haunches, and I was sitting there talking to a friend of mine, and I felt my waistband move. And I looked back, and this idiot was trying to push my pistol out of the holster. I didn't know this man from Adam. And I mean, I'm literally surrounded by people. It should have been that, let's just say I was surrounded by a very pro-gun element. and it was a number of different backgrounds, and I should have been safe. And just enough of my pistol was showing in that environment that this guy thought he would push my pistol out of the holster. And I reached up and I clamped my hand down on top of it. And I turned around and mean mugged him. And he went, "I think I hear my mama calling." And he went that way. And I turned to my buddies and they were like, "What the heck was that?" I was like, "He tried to push my pistol out of the holster." So thankfully I had some retention. But it's amazing to me, because you were commenting about people being silly, what they'll try to do. And so I want to delve into the Uncle Mike's just for a second, and we're going to use Uncle Mike's as a term for a whole class of holsters. If your holster is soft and mushy and cost under $20, it probably is something in the Uncle Mike's category. And jump in here anywhere you want to. It probably has a leather, or not leather, not that nice. It has a nylon strap or something similar that goes over the top, and it snaps on. I'm not a fan of the snaps. A lot of folks that do that don't have any training. Now, there's folks that do have training. They still carry that way, but they don't carry with one in the chamber. They don't practice their draw stroke. They don't practice drawing one-handed and two-handed to be able to get that thing out in a hurry. And then they've got a strap on that thing. So basically, if a bad guy walks up and goes, "Your money or your life," that pistol might as well be on Jupiter.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this in love, and then I'm going to move on from this topic. It's one of those, I love the church guy, Paul Buckner, and that's, they have to repeat after me. And the church guy, Paul Buckner, loves, because the gentleman who lost his life, who sacrificed his life trying to draw at the White Settlement shooting, and actually the gentleman that was interviewed tonight, and forgive me, I just forgot his first name, but Gary, thank you. I was up to Greg, and I was getting there. He said it very tactfully. The man's a hero. He tried, he failed. I would much rather have the skills to be able to draw one-handed quickly, or get over there and get that weapon out and get my shirt up out of the way. And I've had a couple of excellent trainers, instructors that have shown me things, and I know you know these techniques, to get a weapon into play in a hurry, because number one, action always beats reaction. And all the bad guy had to do was go, boom. That's all he had to do. He just had to go about that far and pull the trigger. That's a bad situation. I would have wanted for sure to have been moving on that if I could. That was, and I'm going to tell you, I probably would have still died at that moment. I would have hoped another member of the safety team could have gotten in close and gotten involved. And I'm pretty quick on the draw. Drawing on a shotgun that is all but pointed at you already is not a good place to be. That's one of those places. Beam me up, Scotty. But the gentleman had the weapon back over about where his kidney was, and he tried one-handed to reach back and to draw from there. Now let's take that worst case scenario and let's add an Uncle Mike's soft holster with a snap on the back of it, and you don't practice drawing, and all of a sudden you got to reach back there and get it, and then you have to unsnap it, and then you have to draw, and then you have to chamber around. That is the Sharknado of worst case scenario things that could happen. And unfortunately, a lot of folks who haven't trained and don't practice, that's where they're going to find themselves. And so a gentleman made a comment today that really blessed my heart. And you and I talked about this. Sometimes you get frustrated, arguments spark in a group, or you're trying to provide good material, or, you just, sometimes you kind of shake your head and you're like, did I actually help anybody? And this gentleman made a comment that the White Settlement shooting was an enormous gut check for him and his personal skill sets. And I mean, he didn't go into a huge amount of detail, but it really blessed my heart, because we were talking about, I did a video talking about the gut check that we should all have and honestly be assessing our skills. And I commended the man for it. I told him it takes an enormous amount of maturity to stop and look and go, I would have died right there because I don't have the skill sets that I would need. That's a mature person, as well as the candor to admit it, because a lot of us can go, who doggies? I don't know that I would have lived through that, but not be bold enough to actually admit it. And that level of openness, I commended him for it.
Yeah.
And so I think we have beaten the holster topic pretty thoroughly.
The only thing I want to say real quick, and Michael's posting stuff in the background here on Facebook, which is cool. For those of you that don't know, we have had Michael Holland, Mr. Michael Holland, join us from Tennessee. So he helps us out a great a great bunch with this group now. He's one of the moderators and has taken an enormous amount of activity off of or responsibility off of me, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
So he helps out in the background. So we love you, Mike. Well,
Yes, we do.
but one of the things that he mentioned, which is very, very true, and I didn't realize this until later in my career of carrying and that sort of thing, and that's basically that your belt makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
And I used to go, like, I'd go to Walmart or Target or wherever and buy like a quote unquote utility belt that was black leather, etc. And I used to have all all of these challenges getting, my holster to stay or the gun not to flop or all of this stuff. And somebody finally graciously came up to me and said, "Hey, do you have, are you using a gun belt?" And I'm like, "Well, belts are belts. They're all created equal, right? So what's the difference?" Yeah, and they were like, "No, belts aren't all created equally. You need to do your research." So it kind of pushed me into researching. I've tried a few different ones. I've settled the personal one that I enjoy is with 511. And they're not paying me to say that. It's about I wish they were, right? It's about 40. I want to say it's like $39.99. It's about $40 on Amazon. I got mine at a 511 store because we have a flagship store in Columbus.
Nice.
And when I walked in, the guy gave me like a 30% off coupon. And so,
Wow.
so I went and bought one. And I tried it and I love them. Okay. I actually have three now, that I use for different things, but the reality is when you go, and you can find gun belts on Amazon or eBay or that sort of thing if you're trying to save a little bit of money, versus buying brand name or real expensive stuff. But the nice thing about it is that when you do have a gun, a belt that actually physically is a gun belt, typically the leather in it is a lot thicker, and typically it's not a poor quality, cheap grade of leather. And
It's not going to flex a lot.
right, it does not flex a lot. It stays very rigid with what you're doing. And so if you're planning on that, again, spend the $40. That's like a massive upgrade right there, because then, even if you have to spend less on a holster, then it's going to stay connected to that. And if you run or you do anything physical, you're not going to have any issues because it's contained to your person. A friend of mine was carrying a firearm, and he had an Uncle Mike's holster. And I'll say this and then we can move on. But he was chasing his kids through a corn maze, and he slipped and landed on his backside, and then jumped up and ran after the kids. Well, at one point he was readjusting his pants and he realized that his holster was still on his belt, but the gun wasn't in the holster. So he went back to where he fell, and it was still sitting there. Thankfully, nobody was around it. Nobody grabbed it. So he grabbed it and reholstered it, and all was fair. But even he came to me and he commented and said, "Hey, FYI, make sure that you test your holster out, test your belt, test how you're carrying it, and jog across the street once or twice and see what happens and how it shifts, because certain holsters will cause that. Certain holsters will move or will fall apart or do something like that." So
You bring up a really good point there, and I'm going to make a really quick story. A friend of mine's brother, I got to meet him at a firearms competition, and he talked about the fact that he had a soft holster, and it had pressure. It was actually an upgrade from an Uncle Mike's. It was in the waistband, and it had pressure that was applied by your body and the belt. So it slid in between, but it was still a soft holster. So it really didn't have retention other than what was provided by your body with the pressure against the belt. So he ended up in a situation where, I forget who it was, but He actually got attacked by a gentleman who is a Marshall Islander, which these guys are built big, and a lot of them are good fighters. And there's great people in that group, and there's some not so great people in that group. And he ended up in a situation where this guy came at him. And to my friend's brother's credit, he won the fight. That was impressive. He's got really amazing hand-to-hand skills. A lot of us couldn't have won that fight. But during the middle of the altercation, he was wearing scrubs for pants, and I think a loose-fitting t-shirt. He was working as like a nurse's aide or something. He was working in some kind of hospital, so he had scrubs on. And during the altercation, while they're during the ground pound portion of the fight, he looks over and his gun is laying like a foot and a half from the guy. And the guy and he, like something out of Hollywood, like look at it kind of at the same time. And he said, I realized my kids are here. His kids are here. This is a horrible situation. This guy has attacked me. My weapon is on the ground, and he had to make a call. So he reached over and picked up the weapon and pointed at the guy and went, the fight's over. Because he realized, and a lot of people would go, but he realized if I lose control of this gun, I can die, and he could literally turn the weapon on anyone he wants to if I'm incapacitated. And so he said, at that point, I realized, and by the way, he had a great ground game, had a good stand-up fighting game, had a decent holster, but the weapon had come out. And he said, suddenly I realized this was just as deadly as a knife coming out. He said, I realized this was a bad situation. And he said, I got up off the guy, backed away. The guy was cool. The cops arrived, and somebody was like, he pulled a gun on him. And so the cops came over and said, what happened? And he told them, and they said, actually, you were super cool about it, because we would have done at least the same thing. And that is one of the things that can happen in a fall with a inadequate holster, and it's one of the things that can happen in a fight or fight for your life situation. And then I love the fact that Michael brought up, and I want to shout out to Michael. Michael's an amazing help with the group, helps us vet people as they come in, and with a lot of he helps in the background in ways I can't even begin to say. So he's a huge help to James. It takes a lot of stress off, especially James, but off the both of us. And he had some great comments over here to the side talking about the fact that the belt, and I'm glad you thought about that, Michael, because neither one of us did. Are we ready to jump to firearms?
I think so.
So are you familiar with Mark Gungor? He does Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage. And he gets ready to talk about men's brains and women's brains, and he's got the two little statues, and he walks up there, and before he talks about the women's brains, he crosses himself.
Yep.
This is that moment. So I wrote some stuff down, and I wanted to just talk about a couple things that really I think dovetail way back in the conversation. And you said it was Gary.
Yes.
I just friended him on Facebook, and I apologize, Gary, if you're watching this. I apologize. I'm just learning who you are. But I really loved that talk, and I'm glad you guys had it. And I wanted to just throw a couple comments on that real quick before we jumped into guns proper. And this one I think is pretty pertinent. Jimmy Meeks with Sheepdog Seminars talks about how he's been trying for years to get churches to wake up and get trained. And I've talked to him privately. You've talked to him privately. I've prayed with him in person. He's a pretty amazing guy, and I've seen him really, really stressed out. I got to help him at an event. It was just a God moment, and I really have a lot of respect for him, because I liken him and Carl Chin and Colonel Dave Grossman to Paul Revere, and we've had this conversation. They've been riding around in circles going, the Redcoats are coming, the Redcoats are coming, and people are like, shut up, go away. And people have been laughing at them for years, and they've been ridiculed. They've been ignored. I've been to 2 Sheepdog seminars. I was at one where a guy got up and walked out and demanded his money back because this was never going to happen at his church. And you could see the frustration and the pain in Jimmy's face when he came back in, and you could just see he was like, and so I feel for him. I think people are starting to sit up and take notice. And I want to talk about that specifically. Jack Wilson, in one of the interviews, talked about the fact that they've had their safety team for just under 2 years. And he mentioned that they started their team after the Sutherland Springs shooting. Now, I'm going to assume that the impetus for them starting their team was the Sutherland Springs shooting. So a massacre, a horrible thing that happened that is just heartbreaking, but it saved lives. And that is the thing that what you're doing, what I'm trying to do, what Gary's doing with this amazing tabletop setup, trying to get it out to people. We have the opportunity, and this is me talking to the peanut gallery, to everybody watching. We have an amazing opportunity to sit up and take notice and learn, and to train and to practice what we learn, so that it doesn't happen to us. Because I guarantee you, and this is the horrible thing, there's 1,850 people in this group now. Odds are, in the next couple of years, there's going to be some form of violence. A fist gets thrown, a knife gets pulled, or a gun. Somebody that's watching this, and I'm not going to speak this over this, in Jesus' name I pray it doesn't happen, but odds are it's going to happen to somebody that's watching one of these videos or that's in this group. And so it's time for us to sit up and take notice. And then on that really exciting, uplifting note, we'll start talking about firearms.
Okay.
You and I talked about this a lot. Carry enough gun for the fight. And I've joked about carrying a brace of musket pistols. How about the Habast? You scallywag. I've joked about carrying 4 or 5 single shot musket pistols. And I've got a friend that's got a couple of them. One of these nights, I'm going to get a hold of 1 or 2 of them, and I'm going to make a couple of videos with them. But
can I say something real quick?
Please.
So in this conversation, our intent is to have a relaxed conversation. So I've had Jim Howard on quite a few times, and or a couple times, and I've talked to him a few times offline. And one of the first things he said to me was, "What type of gun do you carry? What caliber, and how many magazines do you carry?" And when I answered all 3 of those, apparently in good succession, he was like, "Okay, great. You're a smart guy. We can be friends." No, he didn't. I'm putting words in his mouth. He didn't say, in so many words, he didn't say, "You're a smart guy. We can be friends." But he was like, "You know what? You get it." And that's all he said. And so
nice.
In this conversation, as much as we joke around and have fun, we're having this discussion because folks have asked us, and people have regularly come to us and said, "What type of holster to use? What type of firearm to use?" So, and again, our intent is not to hurt anybody's feelings, or there's always different levels of extreme here. So that's all I wanted to say. So you're good. So back to the Buccaneer pistols.
Yes. Well, and I had a conversation with somebody years ago that said, "Oh, we just need to go back to the days where people carried single shot little musket pistols, and then you get a mass shooting and it's like pow, reload, and then it's over because everyone's fled." And they might have actually talked something like that. And I started laughing.
Tone of voice.
I didn't. I'm alluding to the fact that they may have.
Okay.
And, but they were explaining to me that the world was just such a safer place when you could just fire the 1 shot, and then and then we moved to the fact that you could fire 6 shots, and the world was just such a safer place. And I'm a history buff. I mean, I'm like here with history. I love history, and I was like, and they're like, "What?" And I said, "Well, are you familiar with pirates? You ever seen any pictures of pirates?" And they had 4 or 5 pistols across their waistband in a sash, and then 3 or 4 shoved into a belt that went over their shoulder with loops in it. And they're like, "Yeah, they swing across with a cutlass in their teeth." And I'm like, "Yeah, the reason they did that was they didn't want to die." And so they're like, "You die." And they New York reloaded. They dropped them. It was the original New York reload. And they fired at somebody else, and they dropped that one, and they went, "Oh." And I'm being silly, but I'm dead serious. And I said, and the other thing that kind of cracks me up is there were cavalry units in the American Civil War that would have 4, 5, 6 6-shot revolvers, and they were in holsters around on the horse, so they could go, "You're dead, you're dead," and they get through the 6 rounds and holster it, and then go, "I've got more." The original, but wait, there's more. And I'm being silly, but one of my instructors made a comment one time. He said, and actually I've heard Grossman say this, but he's like, "He who brings the most ammo to the fight he kind of alludes to the fact that he could win, but he's like, and if you have extra ammo more than you need, you get to be the ammo fairy. And everybody's like, yay, you're our favorite person. And he talks about the fact that, and I'm not a drinker, but from there on, you have to be bought free beer because you were the ammo fairy during the gunfight and you were throwing ammo to people. Again, I'm being silly about a serious topic, but I would much rather have a deeper magazine. If somebody said the bad guy's only going to have one shot, and so to be fair, you need to only have one shot too. No, I want 3 or 4 musket pistols. Thank you very much. If he's only got one shot, the first mistake I'd make walking into a fight was assuming it was going to be a fair fight. And again, I'm being silly, but so we start to talk about things that become very, very important with a firearm. Bringing enough gun to the fight. What that doesn't mean, and we talked about this earlier today, how to handle this with grace and tact. We actually chatted earlier. This doesn't mean a brand of firearm. And I hate to, for the people that were popping popcorn, for the people that were pulling out their Glock shirts and their HK shirts and their Beretta shirts, I hate to break y'all's hearts. That's not what we're talking about. Because I know that there's like 50 people over here lined up with pitchforks and torches waiting. I'm going to tell you Paul Buckner's opinion, and you nod vigorously or throw in comments. I wouldn't personally carry anything with a magazine smaller than 10 rounds. And I believe in backup magazines. Now, on my left hip right now is a backup magazine. I'm a Glock guy. This is a 21 round 9mm magazine. There you go. What is that, a 15 round 40?
Yep.
Yeah. And
we'll get it right back next to the other one sitting behind it.
Exactly. And that's where I'm going with this. I carry a handgun that I can conceal pretty easily. Mine is actually a 40 caliber. It's a Glock 27, but it's converted to 9mm. And there's a couple reasons I did that. I'm not going to get into it. It's immaterial. But I have a 10 round magazine in it. 21 round magazine, followed by its buddy, the other 21 round magazine. I actually knew a young lady that was a police officer that she was very slight framed, and she carried a Glock 26 with a 10 round magazine, and her backup magazines were 2 more 10 round magazines. Mm-hmm. And I said, why would you do that? And she's like, well, I don't like the weight. And so we talked about ways that she could carry more. But if you're going to carry a small capacity handgun, you definitely want to think about having at least 1 reload, if not 2. Not every shooting is going to be the white settlement shooting where 1 round dropped the guy because he had practiced for years and was in a great place with God. You know, as you talked about earlier, I wonder if there was not some remote assistance on that shot. But having enough of a magazine is going to be huge, and having at least 1 backup magazine. And I had a guy tell me, he's like, well, Paul, I carry a Glock 17 with a 17 round magazine in it. I said, okay. So in your mind's eye, you're wrestling around with that gun because you've drawn and somebody's quick, and there's some quick people, and you're fighting, and one of you hits the ejection release. And that magazine's on the floor, and maybe it gets knocked over there. Maybe you've tumbled around and you can't find the magazine. I've trained in mud and had people lose magazines in mud that was that deep. Lose magazines. I was at the range when they found them later, and they were like, you guys remember who it was that lost the magazine? Nobody did. And so having a spare magazine, if you have a magazine malfunction, which they're fairly rare, if you go dry, as the military says, black on ammo, you need to go for another magazine. Mm-hmm. Thirdly, if your magazine gets knocked out of your weapon, I am a Glock guy for several reasons, one of which is my gun still goes bang if there's no magazine in it. Mm-hmm. That's pretty important to me because if homeboy knocks it out of my magazine, I want to be able to go pow, 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 pow. And I'm being funny. I'm doing it on purpose. But please address all letters to Paul Buckner, care of. But I want to be able to get back in the fight as quickly as possible. And if the magazine gets knocked over there and I can quickly reload, so at least 1 spare. I'm a huge believer in at least 2. I know you've done this. I've done this. I've walked into situations where it was a major holiday. I was working a protection detail, or I was working church security, or whatever it was I was doing. Mm-hmm. I may have had as many as 4 pretty high capacity backup magazines on me because it's a come as you are battle. So between the moment that the battle starts and the end of the battle, the ammo you have on you is all you get. And I was at a church safety training, and I know you'll identify with this, where a really nice guy argued that he did not need anything more than his big frame, beautiful Smith & Wesson 357 and a couple of speed loaders. And the instructor politely listened. And then about halfway through the class, when he was reloading 3 times to every one of our reloads, he went, I think it's time for me to get a semi-auto. He's like, if I was in a gun battle with one of you guys, and the poor guy, it's a beautiful gun. I mean, it's one of these things. It needs to be a safe queen. Take it to the range and shoot it, but there's a reason. And so I'm gonna build on this and escalate this, because we've kind of talked about this being like our go-to video for like Michael and different people to point people to, because we really want to flesh this out and talk about this, because what's going to happen is people are going to come in the door from here to eternity, and they're going to ask these questions again and again and again. And this is an opportunity for us to answer them pretty thoroughly, going to try to answer them pretty thoroughly in one setting. And so if we have to run short, maybe we can follow up on it later. So the state of Texas ended up going through a really bad situation, I believe in the 80s. You had high capacity pistol magazines have been around since before World War I, but they were becoming incredibly popular. And there were 2 situations per a Texas Ranger I talked to, retired, who had taught all over the state of Texas. And he said, we were Texas. We were a revolver state. It was the gun that won the West. That's what we did. And he said, and my guys, he said, we had beautiful guns with rounded edges going down into the cylinders where we could get a speed loader in there and just tip it in. And he said, we had beautiful guns. And we lost 2 Texas Rangers in 2 different gun battles, where somebody with a 15 round or better magazine could literally walk up and keep the Texas Ranger's head down with suppression fire and have enough ammo left over while the officer was down. And both men, as I understand the stories, as they were told to me, died in the middle of reloading. I don't know about you, but I don't want to have to reload 3 times to every one of the magazine of the other person that I'm potentially facing. And so that's part of bringing enough gun to the fight.
Well, and I will interject too. That doesn't, like that, the story you just told about the Texas Rangers, that doesn't surprise me, because if we go back in history to the Smith & Wesson 40 caliber, the whole reason that the 40 caliber was invented by Smith & Wesson in the U.S. was because of a shootout with the FBI and
Miami-Dade.
What's that?
The Miami-Dade shooting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, with that down in Florida, Smith & Wesson were trying to come up with a better caliber that they felt would I don't know, better help law enforcement in that gunfight. I know, I mean, we kind of said before we started that we're not going to push one particular brand or name or that sort of thing. I carry other things than Glock on occasion, and I know you do too. One of the nicest things that I think, one of the most positive things about Glock is that, you typically in each caliber, you have 3 different sizes, and the magazines are all interchangeable.
Yes.
So, if I want to go with something smaller as a backup, or if I want to carry something, there's a lot to be said for that, because if I was to get in a situation, I could exchange magazines very easily between platforms of what I have to use. So for sure there's, but, and I say this, and I know you've said it too, but I say this with a lot of my gun classes, it's a lot of times when you go back and forth about brand names, you're kind of like comparing Chevy to Ford, and we all know Chevy's better, but not.
I was baptized Chevy, so
not. No, I say this because half of my safety team actually likes Ford, and if they watch this, they're going to be like, "Yeah, whatever. We know you're wrong." Yeah, but much of it is your preference, obviously your style, what you prefer. There's a firearm that I carry a lot when I go with 9mm, and that's I usually carry a Ruger American compact, and part of the reason is from the 9mm standpoint, I can have 2 17-round magazines, and Ruger has actually kind of gotten to the point where they'll do certain models will interchange with each other now. So they're kind of picking up on that hint. And it's just more comfortable for me. I've shot a 9mm Glock and I wasn't really crazy about it. So, but I really like, I just liked how the Ruger handled the weight, the recoil, how it felt in my hand, the whole 9 yards. So, I mean, again, and we both said this before, we're not trying to say this is what you should do. We're just trying to throw some ideas out for consideration because we've had so many people ask, well, what do you guys do? Yeah. So this is kind of just that.
Well, and that's where it's one of those things based on what is it? Law enforcement says based on my training and experience. I love revolvers. I'm a 357 wheel gun guy. Ruger and Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum revolvers. I'm just like drooling. Somebody commented a minute ago about a revolver that they had carried, and I adore them. I'm not going to take one of them into a potential gun battle. And anytime I get out of bed, there's a chance I could be involved in a gun battle. It's just life. Anytime I walk out of my door, that goes up a little bit. If I go to a bigger city, it goes up even more. And I always try to think about it as like entering hostile territory is, okay, I've left the bathroom and I could be potentially entering hostile territory now. So I should probably have an adequate firearm and some backup magazines. And so, again, I like to be funny, but there's a lot of value, I think, in thinking about those things. So this is where we build up to cross yourselves. The road could get bumpy comments. So if you have to address comments, address them to Paul Buckner. But imagine that you are you're now Jack Wilson and you're in that environment. Carl Chin, when he was involved in his church shooting, and I believe his book about that was called When Evil Invades the Sanctuary. Great guy. He had a 32 caliber handgun, and I won't name the handgun because the brand, and we talked about this before, and I love the perspective James had on it, was the brand has a lot less to do than how much experience you have behind the firearm and how many rounds you've shot through the firearm. There's a break-in period. We talked about this earlier, and I love that perspective because I'm an admitted Glock fanboy, but it fits my hand and I've shot them forever. I mean, I actually had a first-gen Glock 17 heirloom handgun. I mean, I don't have it now. I've passed it on to another family member, but I'm Glock way back. But there are excellent firearms that don't cost that much. There are excellent firearms that you can test them. And it's sort of like, to go back to the vehicle analogy, lemons come in all vehicle makes and models. And so, perish the thought, even Glock could have a failure gun. They do have a department that handles, that. But the way that James put it that I really liked, because we talked about how to handle this tastefully, was James made the comment that, because we were talking about a round count and that there's a break-in period with a firearm. So if you have an adequate caliber, and we'll get to that in just a minute, that's the other cross yourself part of the conversation. Because I guarantee you there's one group of people leaning in going, oh, it's about to get good. And there's another group sitting here sharpening knives, waiting, going, oh, he better not talk about the Lord's caliber. Oh, hold me, St. Peter. So, again, being funny. But the interesting thing there is, if you have tested your firearm, and this is the really scary thing, is I have talked to people who carry a firearm every day that they haven't put more than 50 rounds through. What? So you need to put about 1,000 rounds through a handgun before, and different guns have different break-in periods. That's mine. 1,000 rounds through a handgun. I put 1,100 rounds through my Glock 27 in less than 2 days at a course. It was amazing. And I learned a lot about myself and I learned a lot about my weapon. And I know that my weapon is trustworthy and it is battle tested. And I know I can trust my weapon in a gunfight. The last thing you want to do is be desperately trying to clear a weapons malfunction in the middle of a gunfight. It's a cliche, but it's a cliche that's true. You have the rest of your life to clear that malfunction. So if you're sitting here going, times, it doesn't work. It does not work in a gunfight. And if you go dry, if you go pew, 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 click, and the bad guy goes, ooh, you're dead, because they know you went dry. And if you can't eject that magazine or flip it out and reload, you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. So deep magazine, test your weapon, and train. And I want to make sure people understand this, because I sometimes use these words interchangeably, and it's a Paul Buckner problem. When I say train, what I mean to say is go to somebody like James, go to somebody like Strategos, go to somebody like any number of people that we know that are doing great things out in the community, and do good training and train under someone, and then go practice. And so there's times I'll say that I'm going to train, and what I actually mean is I'm going to practice what I've trained, because you don't train unless somebody's watching you going, don't do that. That's training.
One of the things you just touched on that we talked about before with customer service, I want to shout out for that too, because any gun, the way we manufacture things in the U.S., any gun can come off the manufacturer line brand new and have issues. I've seen them with Smith and Wesson. I've seen them with Ruger. I've seen them with Glock. Whatever. I've seen them with Taurus. Whatever name that you want to throw out there as a solid firearm. I've taken a brand new firearm out of the box, loaded it, and I couldn't use it.
Wow.
So, and I won't tell you the brand, Smith and Wesson, but.
No!
No, you know what? But here's the thing. I called them, and this is where it gets cool. I called them and I said, "Hey, I'd like to talk to the gunsmith on staff," and they were like, "Okay." So hang on just a second. So they put me through the gunsmith, and every gun manufacturer has one on by the phone that they'll answer questions for you, no cost. You can call the 800 number, talk to them. And he asked me a couple questions like, "Have you tried this, this, and this?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, you know what? I think it's a magazine issue. It's not feeding correctly. Go ahead and send the magazines to us, and we'll take a look at them." So, they actually sent me a packet, postage paid. I could put the magazines in, send back to them. In about 2 weeks, I received a package back, and it said, "So we did fix this is the problem. One of the springs was bad in the magazine. It wasn't forwarding correctly. Thank you for your patience. We appreciate your business." And they actually included an extra magazine for the trouble. So
Nice.
What I typically look at is, and I've had issues with that Ruger American that I carry that I mentioned earlier. I called them and I said, "Hey, this is what it's doing, and this is what's happening, and I use this as a duty firearm, and I really can't have it out of commission for a long period of time." And they said, "You know what? We'll go ahead and send you the parts, and we'll ship them out overnight right now. Like as soon as we get off the phone, we'll ship them to you, and then you can fix it." And that's one thing I will say for customer service. That's what you want to look at, because those options are out there. Now, building your trust, and I've said this in classes when I teach classes, but building your trust back into that firearm that you've had an issue with, that's a challenge, because you should not be carrying or trusting that firearm again until you've put enough rounds to be sufficiently satisfied with how it's functioning and how it's acting. Now, typically after a repair or something major like that, I'm probably 300-400 rounds before I put that back into the rotation of I'm going to carry this every day, just because I want to make sure that when I pull the trigger, it goes bang like it's supposed to. Yeah. And if you've had a gun not work and you've had issues with it, that alleviates a lot of trust that you have in that. I had an issue with my Glock 23, and I sent it away to a certified Glock individual, and he fixed it for me. And I said, "I don't know why it's doing this. The trigger wasn't resetting like it should." And he sent it back, and it was a simple fix. He's like, "I tested it out. Here you go." So the average firearm, even Glock, will say 3,000 to 4,000 rounds before stuff needs to be replaced. And that doesn't mean that, okay, at 3,000 rounds, sorry guys and gals, you get to buy a new firearm. That just means that at 3,000 to 4,000 rounds, it's sufficiently broken into the point of possibly wearing stuff out, because the average person doesn't shoot 3,000 to 4,000 rounds.
Right.
Which, if you're part of a safety team, shame on you, because you should be above average, and going out and shooting, I mean, I can go through 200 or 300 rounds in about an hour, honestly.
Yeah.
Easily. And if you're doing the moving shooting or special training type situation where you're going through magazines, you can go through them a lot faster. My point is that there should be no question in your mind when you draw that firearm that it's gonna shoot. You know where it's gonna go. You know how. If I don't clear or get to the point where I'm pushing forward, if I have to shoot quickly from my hip, I know, okay, this is where it's going to go based on how I'm holding it and moving forward. So I'm just looking through the comments. Dave Johnson posted, my rule of thumb is to fire at least 250 rounds out of a new gun before I consider it to be reliable. That's a good point because honestly, you want to be as comfortable with it as possible, and it just there's so many things with how stuff is made today that it's very possible. It's like you can go out and buy a brand new car and it can be a lemon because there's issues or there's problems with it, and you just spent how many thousands of dollars on it, and it's still the same thing can happen with a firearm. I've shot brand new Kimbers that were $1,400-$1,500 guns that had issues where it was like, okay, this $300 or $400 Smith and Wesson or Sky pistol or Glock or whatever or Taurus operated better because stuff happens.
Yeah.
But I'll throw it back to you so you can.
Yeah, I'm going to keep getting deeper. I'm going to keep digging myself a bigger hole. So the people that are sitting here with the popcorn are like, oh, he's going back to calibers. So I'm going to start talking about separating out calibers. I'm going to start on the small side and I'm going to start working my way big, because we now have, with the birth of the internet and with all the statistics that we're pulling out, many police departments, and I mean, all the way from the local town all the way to the state level, they are submitting their shooting records to the FBI. And so, and I believe it was Gary that mentioned they've been studying like mass shootings since about 2000. Well, we have a study that came out, and I forget the name of the guy that did it, but it's a really cool study. They studied 1,400 defensive shootings. And there was a lot of things that came out of it that made a lot of sense. So we're going to start talking about caliber. And this is where I may get burned in effigy. I may get hate mail, but every caliber can kill you. I don't want to get shot with a BB gun all the way up to a howitzer. I don't want to get shot with any of them. But there are calibers that perform poorly under defensive shootings. And so this is where James is smiling quietly, going, better you than me. So the 22 caliber round is not a bad round. You've got to be careful putting it in a handgun and shooting it at somebody. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. The 25 caliber round and the 32 caliber round are just rounds that are an answer to a question no one was asking. They're just rounds that you're like, who invited you? And so
I want to throw in two things real quick here. Number one, Michael's eating popcorn. That concerns me.
Right.
And number two, before you start sending hate mail, I want to remind you one thing, and this is what I say in most of the gun classes I teach. Two things. Nobody looks down the barrel of a 22 pistol and says, that's just a 22, go ahead and shoot. Okay.
Exactly.
The second thing that I like to call people's attention to is the fact that President Ronald Reagan's assassination attempt was with a 22.
Yep.
And he almost died on the operating table because of what the bullet and the damage that it did to him.
Yes.
And it wasn't a direct shot. It actually ricocheted off of the door of the limo and pierced his side, and it was enough of a place that it went between his ribs and sliced his lungs, and he started literally suffocating in blood,
drowning in blood.
Right.
Well, there's two things I want to jump on that with, because I got to study that shooting a little bit. The poor Secret Service guy that pushed him into the bullet. He's like, yeah. I saw an interview with him where he's like, they kind of studied the footage and I kind of shoved the president into the bullet. The bullet hit the armored side of the limo. And I don't know if they called it the Beast back then, but it hit the side of the limo and flattened out. And so instead of being kind of cylindrical, it was actually much flatter. And the second part of that, the Reagan could have continued in a fight. Now, I'm not going to say that people don't have lights out shots. I mean, sure, you could drop a bullet from orbit and kill somebody if you had the right angle and hit him in the right place. But in that circumstance, he could have still continued the fight. And literally to piggyback on what James is saying, I don't want to get shot with a 22. But what I'm saying is, in a defensive shooting, I want to put us in the shoes of Jack Wilson, who was carrying a 357 SIG, by the way. He was carrying a SIG handgun, but he was specifically carrying the 357 SIG round, and which is a good round. It's a little expensive to get reloads for and whatever, but it's a good round. And so why am I picking on the 22? Well, just for this moment, I'm going to pick on 3 rounds: the 22, the 25, and the 32. It's hard to get defensive ammo, as in self-defense ammo, for those 3 calibers. It's actually a lot easier for the 22 than it is for the 25 and the 32. And ballistically, they don't perform great. Now, everybody's heard a story about somebody that got killed by one of those rounds. That's fine. Most of the time that when people talk about somebody getting killed with a 22, it's from a rifle. I actually read the paperwork, and I'm not knocking the 22. I'm just not going to carry one in a defensive shooting in a moment, and I'll tell you why. But there was and it's not this story, but this story is pertinent. There's a doctor in Little Rock that I read about. I believe it was Little Rock, that he fired an H&R, like the break barrel revolver, and I think it was a 4-inch barrel. And he actually had been interviewed for this article, and he put 9 rounds point blank into the chest of a guy that was trying to mug him. And the guy looked down, looked at him, called him a couple names that weren't terribly friendly, and walked away. Here's why. 2 things. He shot him with rifle 22 caliber ammo, not defensive, quick burning powder defensive loads for a handgun. There's a thing that happens with pistol cartridges that don't commonly happen with rifle cartridges. You don't typically put rifle ammo in pistols. Well, this guy had just grabbed like Federal or Remington or something and put it in there thinking all ammos were created equally. It was designed to burn a slow burn down a 15-inch barrel and hit full velocity. It would have been a lot more, it would have probably ricocheted off the ribs and blended the guy's insides, and that's not a very pretty picture, but it would have done much more like what happened to President Reagan than what actually happened, because all 9 rounds stopped against his sternum and his rib cage and kind of just ticked him off. But here's why I don't recommend carrying a mouse caliber handgun. In defensive shootings, they're actually not known to stop people, and that's what you want to have happen. You want people to stop. Imagine you're Jack Wilson and you draw and you come out with your 25 caliber plinker pistol. 2 problems with that, 3 problems with that. 1, you probably don't have defensive ammo in it. 2, you have a little bitty tiny barrel, itty bitty barrel that's not giving it a lot of revolutions, and you don't have a great sight picture. It's hard to hold on to them. I've seen guys that at 10 feet could not hit a Coke can with their 25 or 32 caliber pistol. Now, Michael and I were talking about the fact that, I'm sure you've done this, James, we kind of like to push the envelope with that. And I've owned a 32 and a 25. Actually, I've owned a couple of 32s, owned a half dozen different 22 handguns over the years. I can generally outshoot most people with mouse gun calibers just because that's the way I roll. But imagine you're Jack and you go, I'm going to pull this 32 caliber pistol, this 25 caliber pistol, and I'm going to go bang, and I'm going to hope I don't miss. And then there's not as much powder pushing that round, right? And anywhere you want to jump in. It's going to lose a huge amount of energy as it's traveling, and it doesn't have a lot of weight, and it doesn't have a lot of velocity when it hits the guy. Yeah. I actually was present for a situation years ago where somebody fired a warning shot with a 22 short and hit a doe deer in the side of the head. It was a warning shot to get her to run away, not thinking about the fact that a 22 short's bullet drop at about 100, 150 feet was going to be enormous. And it went and hit her in the side of the head, and she turned around. It didn't draw blood. It bounced off the side of her head, and she turned around and blew. She snorted at the shooter like, "You jerk," and walked away. So bullet weight and velocity matter. And I know that's a funny story, but I remember things like that and I don't ever forget them. So don't bring too little gun. Don't bring too short a barrel. Don't bring too small a magazine. Don't bring FMJ ammo. Please, 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 for the love of John Moses Browning, don't bring FMJ ammo to a gunfight. And then finally, don't bring a caliber that's not known for shutting people down.
Yeah.
So now
I'll just throw in, I think a lot of times we went from, like, when we talk about the history of the gun world, right, for concealed carry versus non-concealed carry, we went from nothing is concealable, there's nothing on the market, to concealable, to okay, let's slap everything in any type of caliber all the way up to 380. It doesn't matter, as long as we can make it concealable, it'll sell, it'll be fine. And so I think, and I've had a 22, I've had a 32 before. I think part of it is, in our minds, we think that because something's smaller, it'll have less recoil and we'll be better with it. And unfortunately, you're going to have more recoil with something smaller because there's less material to absorb that recoil in the science of shooting. And so we're kind of going back the other way, with every caliber known to man is now available in a small concealable, model, because every company out there, Glock just came out with a 22. Who would have thought that? For practice
19, but yeah.
Right. So, but when you think about it and you look at it that way, just because something's smaller doesn't mean that it's, and so I think perception wise, I think a lot of us have in years past have thought, well, it's good. If I'm out in the back 40, I've got this and it's something and it's better than nothing, which is true. It is. But when we're talking about safety and we're talking about distances, in the distance of 50, 60 feet, again, Jack Wilson shot, it's just not going to cut it. At 32, I'm not sure, honestly, what the FPS on that is. I'd have to look it up, but I can tell you that, coming out of something like a 2 or 3 inch barrel, even a regular 22 round is not going to have the full velocity that it says on the box. Yeah. So
you're looking at 900 FPS with about 128 foot-pounds of pressure.
Yeah. See, now 900 FPS, if it was fired out of a decent sized barrel, that would be better. The 40 is typically 900 FPS, but again, most people aren't going to have like a 5 or 6 inch barrel on their mouse gun.
Right. Yeah, you do see them, but it's pretty rare. And bullet weight, and there's all this science behind this, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because I hadn't thought of adding that to it. But yes, there's a reason that Derringers make terrible sense. They call them belly guns. You're supposed to poke it up against the belly. And Michael used that term the other day in a private chat we had, and it's a great way to look at that. So now we get to talk about the part that everybody goes nuts over. I've seen people that can talk about religion, they can talk about cars, they can talk about women, they can talk about politics, they can talk about any other topic until you mention caliber, and then they turn into, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and they lose their minds. So we're going to discuss the forbidden calibers. So we're going to go, and I'm going to leave. Okay, how do I do this? I'm going to leave the 380 out of it because it's got its own special little category. But we're going to say 38, 9mm, 40, 45, 357, and 357 SIG. Those are the middle of the road calibers. So I have seen people end friendships, refuse to talk to people, storm out of the gun store, leave the range angry because somebody besmirched the caliber that they were a patron of. And here's the really, really messed up thing. You think they were married to this caliber. Do you take this bullet? Yeah. So here's the thing. 1,400 defensive shootings that have been studied. And with a lot of these were with combinations of ammunitions, but a lot of these were with defensive ammunitions.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 2 to 5% difference in performance between all of those calibers in the middle of the road, which means I will josh with James because he carries a 40. 40's losing popularity, but there's nothing wrong with the 40. There's nothing wrong with it. It's an excellent round, but there's a 2 to 5% difference in performance. So here's where I hit the meat of why I say all this stuff about caliber. This is where I get excited, because when people go, what brand gun should I buy? Which I will tell them suggestions, but I'm like, you got to go handle the gun and then shoot it. What kind of defensive ammo should I carry? What caliber should I carry? This is where I get really excited, because it doesn't matter as much as people think it does. It's science. It's statistics. It's actual people that fell down and didn't get back up again. And so here's the really interesting thing. You really want to be able to fire a minimum of 4 shots in 2 seconds, because oddly enough, very few shootings go down the way that the Jack Wilson Olympic shot went. Guy down, and he had enough bullet weight and he had enough velocity, and he got it where it mattered. There's a band that runs around your head, your ears encompass it, and if you can put a bullet through that area, people go and they fall down. And we want people to fall down. We don't necessarily want them to die, but we want them to stop fighting. That's why we say we shot to stop the bad guy. And so caliber makes a lot less at that point within that band of calibers. It makes a lot less of a difference than shot placement, and we can talk about that, but also the ability to have follow-up shots, because people, when their adrenaline's pumping, when they're on drugs, when they're really, really angry, some people just have the ability to absorb a lot of lead. And there's a lot of statistics that back that up. There's some really crazy shootings. There's a police officer, you can look him up. He was a firearms instructor, shot with a 45 caliber Glock. He fired 14 rounds into a bad guy that was shooting at him and fighting him the entire time. You read this, and he had God's round, and he had hydroshocks. He had HST rounds, and it didn't stop. The guy lived all the way to the hospital, and I think he hit him twice in the forehead, and it didn't kill him. It just knocked him down. And so there's a lot of myths that modern understandings of ballistics are bringing out, that there aren't these phaser rounds that dissolve people. They don't just and they're gone. And I'll throw one more thing in there, and then I'll throw it back to James. And so the reason I mentioned all this stuff is, if you draw a graph in your mind and you find this sweet spot in the middle, this is where I get excited about. If you can shoot a 9mm and you can fire 4 rounds in under 2 seconds, 2 seconds or less, and you can fire and bring it back on target. I got to get my hands here and bring it back on target fast enough that you can put 4 rounds in 2 seconds or less I'm a 21-foot guy, minimum 21 feet from the target that I do that, and I'm looking at a 6-inch circle. A lot of people, it's an 8-inch circle. I'm down to like a 6-inch circle, because follow-up shots can matter. The first guy to get rounds on target, it can help, but follow-up shots matter. So if you can pick up, the 454 Casull, if you can pick up a 500 Magnum and you're Grizzly Adams, and you can go kaboom, 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 and you can put 4 500 Magnum rounds the size of my thumb in somebody's chest in less than 2 seconds, I'd love to see that. But if you can do that in less than 2 seconds, by all means, carry a 454 Casull or a 500 Magnum. But a lot more people are able to do that with a 9 or a 40 or some people can do it with a 45. I've seen a big old hoss that can do it with a 40. He can sit there and rock a 45 and it don't move in his hands. He's a big old boy. But your 357 SIG, your 940, your 45, that's that little window where that becomes important. So
yeah, I'm just going to say, please don't go tell your pastor that we told you should buy a 454. And that's the only type of gun that you should be carrying, because Paul was actually joking right there.
Yes. Yeah, disclaimer.
But, no, honestly, in all seriousness, usually what I tell people is find a gun and a caliber that you're comfortable with, a size that you're good with, that's more comfortable for you, something that's like you can handle the recoil, and go up that spectrum of calibers as much as possible till you get to the point where you can't successfully shoot the next one up. So for years, 40 was kind of my sweet spot, where I was like, you know what, I haven't found a 45 that I can handle accurately and put, at 21 feet, put in a 6-inch target repeatedly. And so that's why, to me, the only thing I could find that I could do that with would be like a 1911. And to me, a 1911, I carry it sometimes, but that's kind of a big gun with it actually, and it's not a full size, it's commander. So it has a smaller barrel, but that's still a lot of barrel to be carrying when it's, 4-inch, or I think it's 4.25-inch barrel.
And a limited mag capacity.
Right. And that's what concerns me more, quite honestly, is the fact that with that, I only have 5 or 6 shots. Now, I could give you statistics of how quick I can shoot, and Paul and I have never shot at the same time. I'm sure he would probably beat me, but it would be fun at some point to actually go out and shoot together.
We need to.
We'd both be like so competitive that it'd probably be insane. Like both of our kids would be like, just stop it. Okay.
Right. It's been 3 days, Dad. Come on.
4,000 rounds later. But, the reality is, when I look at it, that's a good point. Okay, I can carry the same size gun, same, decent stopping power with 2 magazines. And how many rounds do I have? Well, if I look at it right now, I've got 21 rounds. So when I look at it and I think, okay, I've got a 1911, 21 rounds, that doesn't give me a whole lot of comfort, because I think, okay, with my adrenaline running, even if I were to make a good shot, or if I could make a Jack Wilson type shot, I am still, or, if that didn't happen, I'm still going to have to go through and shoot, and I'm probably going to miss. Right. And that's what a lot of times people fail to kind of calculate in. I've seen police officers that shoot quite a bit go out. Yeah. I don't want to go down that story or that line, but I've seen police officers on live television shooting at a moving vehicle going away, empty, the vehicle was moving away. They were shooting at the vehicle to get the person to stop. Okay. Live television, emptied the magazine, dropped the magazine, reloaded, and kept shooting. And when they recovered the vehicle, this was an individual that they were serving a felony warrant. The individual ducked around the house, jumped in the cruiser, and took off. So this officer is shooting at the cruiser, right? When they recovered the cruiser, not a single spot on it was damaged from the 40 M&P that the officer shot at the car.
That's embarrassing.
It is embarrassing. And so, right away, a lieutenant showed up, and because the press was pulling up in their van while it was all going on, because I said it was live. So I'm watching this actually happen on my television, and I'm standing up yelling at the television, stop shooting. And of course, at that point, my wife is like, what's going on? Why are you yelling at the television? I'm like, stop shooting, because there's cars driving by on this road, and this police car, lights and sirens are going is in the opposite direction. So even the most, and my point in saying that is not to belittle anyone, but to realize and understand that some officers don't practice as much as somebody that often has a hobby for firearms. So when I look at that, I think, okay, so this individual probably had, this massive target that was going away from them, and they probably shot, let's just say 20 rounds, 1 magazine and half of another. So when I look at that and I think, okay, I'm not going to put myself in a place of probably being the same way. So I would like a little bit more cushion. And so to me, that's kind of why I went to the 40, and sometimes I do use the 9 too, but with the 40, I've got, 3 15-round magazines plus 1, that's 45. To me, and again, it's not always about how many you have as much as from the sake of how many magazines do I have. If I have a malfunction or something like that, I'm just prepared. It's the difference of putting a pocket knife in your pocket versus a tactical knife. maybe your preference is there one or the other, but when you go, obviously when you go from a 45 to a 9 or 40 to a 9, or you're in that category of a 9mm, you're going to be able to carry more. So if you did 3 magazines with a 9mm, you're talking 17 times 3. It's late Eastern Standard Time, but you kind of get the idea with that. So I don't want to keep these good folks too much longer. We're losing them and they're dropping off like flies.
Well, and I do want to hit a couple more quick things only, and I'm going to try to be quick about it only just because I'd like this to be the thing we can go back to later. And what time is it there though? Is it 11?
Quarter after, yeah.
Quarter after 11. So I'm going to try to wrap this up because these things can become very important in a conversation, and it can help us to, because you made great points about that. I can carry a heavy steel gun that is heavy and it's cumbersome and it's a lot of weight to carry, and maybe I get 8 rounds in it, or I can carry a lighter weight, more modern gun, and I can carry more ammo. And so I want to talk about carrying too much gun for the fight. You can actually get into there are rounds that you really shouldn't carry. And again, to go back to what James was saying, I was joking about the 454 Casull or the 500 Magnum, because you can actually get over penetration. You don't want to shoot through the bad guy and maim somebody on the other side through 3 walls that was a block away walking their dog. And that's possible with certain bullet weights. It is, especially with rifle rounds. But you also don't want to carry too expensive of a gun. And I'm all for carrying quality, carry a quality gun. But I actually have seen guys, I know of a guy, he was at a defensive shooting. He is also a U.S. Law Shield client. And the officer comes up and he had holstered his weapon. He had shot the bad guy. The bad guy is not getting back up. I think the bad guy lived, but he was down for the count. The officer's like, look, I need to take your weapon. And the officer handcuffs the guy, takes his weapon and throws it over, and didn't get enough travel. And instead of landing on the grass, it landed on the pavement, on the sidewalk, and skitters. This is a $2,500 custom Kimber. He said, I was like, no, because this is 5 decent handguns. And I know of another guy that, God bless him, he bought an officer's pistol that was a .380 used in World War I. This thing is highly collectible. He bought it for $900. It was worth at the time like $1,100. And I said, I got to ask you a dumb question, because he's going to carry a .380. Okay, that's fine. If that's what you want, carry a .380. But I said, why would you carry, it's not an heirloom gun, but why would you carry a collector's gun? My Glock is not a collectible. It's a tool. I was at a class last year that I was asked to hold it out 5 feet in front of me and drop it straight down on the ground. They were demonstrating a point. My gun's been dropped before. But he said, and he walks up next to me, and the instructor turns to me and he says, hold it out in front of you. And I knew exactly what he was going to do. And he goes, drop it straight down to the ground and leave it there until I tell you to pick it up. And I went, and I dropped it. And he said, you handled that well. He said, I had a guy that brought over $2,000 worth of custom 1911 with him. And he said, he was like, and he said, I watched the man try to decide whether giving back, like not being able to get his money out of the class, was worth it just to leave, because he was not going to drop that gun. So having too expensive of a gun, it can get hurt, it can get destroyed, it can get they have to take it as evidence. Remember Jack Wilson's interview? They took his gun. And a lot of these areas that they hold evidence, they're not climate controlled. And so sometimes there's moisture in there or whatever. And so don't carry too much gun for the fight in that sense. I've seen people, one guy told me, he's like, it finally clicked with me. I was carrying my grandpa's gun. It was getting old. It started giving me problems. And I went, this might not save my life, but also, what if I have to defend myself with it and I don't get the gun back, or it takes me 5 years to get it back? So don't carry too much gun for the fight. And I'm going to try to hit these quickly. Don't carry a hipster gun. Now, what does that mean? I'm not going to name a brand, but I have a friend that, God bless him, I love this guy. I shoot with him competitively. He's an amazing guy, but he's this guy that he can't have the truck you have. He can't have the dog you have. He can't like the team you like. So, of course, he can't carry the gun you carry. And I heard an instructor say, and my friend was there for it, he said, if you can't go to any gun store and buy a holster for it, if you can't get spare parts and aftermarket parts, night sights, lasers, flashlights, weapon mounted lights, got to look into that. That's good stuff. If you can't go get stuff for it readily from just about anywhere, don't carry the gun to save your life. Own it. I have got a firearm that was made in England, and it, okay, that's fine. That's fine. Don't carry it. And the problem he ran into was he could not find a Kydex holster with any kind of retention that would fit his gun. So you know what we did? We got out the little toaster oven and we took a Glock 19 holster, and I made homeboy a holster that would fit his gun because there aren't any on the market. And so I won't name the company.
I mean, I've made that mistake before too. I was telling you before we started the video, I bought a Bursa 40, and I did some research, found great gun, single stack. It did exactly what I wanted. I love the gun, but you know what? Replacement magazines were almost $60 a piece.
Yeah.
And to find somebody, I ended up actually finding a guy in Florida on eBay that would make me a special holster because I couldn't get a Kydex holster. I couldn't get a holster anywhere. But I found this guy, and I emailed him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I've got the mold for those. I can do those." And I'm like, awesome. So thankfully he didn't charge me a crazy ton, but the less common it is, the more expensive things are going to be. And anymore, when I purchase a firearm, I usually look at how much the magazines are going to cost, because I usually like to buy 2 or 3 extra just to have. And, if I'm looking at, I don't know, a Glock 23 or a Glock 22 or whatever, those magazines are pretty easy to get. And, there's aftermarket parts that you can, or aftermarket magazines that you can not break the bank and purchase. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
So I've got one more, and this one's kind of fun. We were talking about this the other day. So there are rounds that just don't perform well against barriers, and people are going to go, well, why would you be shooting a barrier? So I had a really amazing opportunity to go into like a salvage yard, and it had backstops. And we've talked about this before, and I have been really, really blessed for it, because it's one thing to hear somebody say, well, I shot this caliber and it performed like this. Like back in the day, and there's still a lot of this stuff out there, 20 years ago, calibers performed differently. We had different powders, we had different bullet weights, we had different barrels with different rifling. And we had different defensive ammo. The hollow point was in its infancy. So if we want to think about the hollow point really being like a 1935 truck versus a brand new truck with GPS and you've got all of these things that we've added to vehicles. Ammunition has come so far. I mean, there are firearms that people love to carry today that were invented and designed before the invention of anti-lock brakes, before women could vote, before we walked on the moon, before the jet engine, before the assassination of Kennedy, and people still carry them. And they were not designed with feed ramps that supported a modern hollow point bullet. So what gun you carry can matter, because I don't know about you, but I don't have a problem. Carry the Lord's round, carry a 45, but make sure that the feed ramps can handle a hollow point.
And on that, I'm just going to say real quick, because it's a good place to interject. Make sure that what you're carrying, if you are buying 2020 ammo, make sure that your gun can handle the pressure and the science behind that round.
Good point.
If you're using a firearm that was your grandfather's, and I may be dating myself here, but I've done gun classes before where I had a guy step up with a Luger 9mm, and he shot it for his qualification, and the entire gun blew up in his hand because he had loaded it with modern 9mm Luger ammo. And I mean, literally, and I had a vest on. When it blew up in his face, and I hit the ground behind him, and I got up and started picking up pieces of his gun everywhere. And I looked like in front of him because I was kind of afraid of what I was going to see. And I said, "Sir," because he was an older gentleman. I said, "Sir, are you okay?" And he looked down at what was left of the gun in his hand, and he looked over at me and he said, "Well, it's never done that before." And I'm like, oh my goodness.
He handled it well.
Well, in my hand here, I picked up 3 or 4 components of what was left of that gun, and he still had the frame in his hand. But yeah, that's what I tell people all the time. Collector's items or collectibles or antiques, those, I have a firearm that it's 1911. I like it a lot. My dad helped me get it as a birthday present, and to me, it has more sentimental value of my dad helping me with it than anything else. And that's not a gun. I mean, I take it to the range to have fun, but that's not a gun that I'm okay with dropping on the ground.
Right.
It's not a gun that I'm okay with, being out of my possession for a year and a half to 2 years while a criminal investigation is done.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what you're seeing is absolutely true.
I'm glad you said that, because that's one of the things I love about the synergy that I have with James, and we're building more and more with Michael, is we're not the end all be all of all of this. And we may find in 5 years that now there's this many more years of ballistics and they've changed ammos even more, and we might start recommending something different or whatever. There's one real final thing that I've got, and that's talking about there are certain calibers that don't perform. And I'm thinking I have 4 or 5 minutes on this at the most, and we'll be done.
Sure.
Because I know it's late for you, and I'm thinking just to the future for this deal, for people that could see this down the road, because this is something that we can do once, and maybe it can bless people again and again and again. Because I know that you and I both get Forrest Whitaker eye when we go into other groups that are a lot of times not even church safety related. And you look at how many times people have asked the same question over and over and over and over again. And it's mind numbing, because, and then it becomes an argument about, well, I carry this gun in the color orange because orange is more dangerous. Anyway, so there are bullets that don't perform well against barriers. 38 caliber bullets are actually known that the first round will hit a typical windshield and skip off of it, and the second round will go through it. We had a shooting in our area 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and I was really getting into ballistics, and a guy stepped out of his house and shot at a sheriff's deputy, I believe. It was an officer, and shot at him and shot through his windshield with a 38 caliber pistol revolver, and hit the guy in the jaw, actually broke his jaw, embedded in his jaw. And the officer survived. And somebody made the comment about it shooting through there, and I said he had to have fired at least twice. And the person looked at me, and it came out in the paper. The man fired twice. The first round cratered the windshield slightly, and the second one went through it. And why do I bring that up? We were talking about, you, James and I, we were talking about this earlier. There's an alarming number of churches that have people running into them, like driving and hitting these churches. I don't know if it's on purpose. I don't know if it's by accident. But now let's put you in a situation where you've got to take that shot, and it's a bad guy, and God forbid in Jesus' name it happens to anybody we know, us or anybody we know, but they're driving and you have a clear shot and you have to shoot through the windshield, and you brought a round that isn't sufficient to penetrating the barrier. 22 is probably not going to do it. I actually have seen a windshield that got hit by a 22, and it actually, it actually spun off. 25 and 32 is probably not going to do it. I actually watched a 380 at 4 feet from a windshield go through and backspin. It had lost, it would have been like about the speed of a baseball, like a fat baseball. It was down to probably under 100 miles an hour. Now that'll hurt, but it'll tick somebody off. And so there are things that you have to be careful with going through barriers. Now, here's the thing that's really cool for you and I. 9mm, and these were all defensive caliber or defensive rounds that we were using. And we specifically used Federal HST in 40 and a 9mm. 40 and 9mm performed almost identically through windshields from the inside out, from the outside in, through doors from the inside out and from the outside in. 40 actually deflected, in our experience. This is my experience, but it was quite a bit of shooting. 40 actually deflected a little bit more. What surprised me was God's round, these 230 and heavier grain 45 rounds actually went thud and actually did not, even in defensive calibers, as in defensive rounds rather, didn't actually go through a lot of these doors. A lot of these doors in vehicles have about 3 layers of metal. You have a skin, and then you got some stuff in the middle that holds the windows and whatever, and then you've got an inner layer of a lot of these vehicles. And we actually found that sometimes upwards of half the time, 45 was actually stopping. Bullets do weird things going through barriers. I've talked about this a long time ago in a video. We shot headrests, and so we had clear shots, we had backstops, nobody was in danger. We shot through the vehicle from the back, and this was several vehicles we did this to. Headrests, because they move, it actually almost always deflected the bullet, or actually it was like 1 in 5 times that it went straight through the headrest and actually would have hit the person in the head. And so this is why deeper magazines for follow-up shots are important. But there's certain calibers, in my opinion, that don't perform as well. And in my experience, the 38 and the 38 and the 380 through certain barriers don't perform as well. And I've seen it with drywall, I've seen it with other things. But these are calibers, in my opinion, based on my training and my experience. I got to put that proviso out there. They're old calibers, and I have not seen as much improvement, in my experience, with the 38 and the 380 that I've seen in the 9, the 40, even the 45, and like the 357 SIG, which is a much newer caliber. And I'm pretty much out of, pardon the pun, ammo. I think I'm about there.
Well, one of the things I'll throw out real quick, and then we can wrap it up. But when you're talking about shooting through things, a window in a vehicle might not seem like that big of a deal, but the application of shooting through glass, even that shooting through glass in church, there's a lot of different odd materials in church buildings. In my church building, 3/4 of it is concrete and brick. So, it would behoove me to go out at some point in time and actually practice, okay, what happens when you shoot at a brick wall?
Yeah.
Even just from the mindset of not capacity, ricochet. And okay, if I shoot straight on a 9mm, what's going to happen? And really think through, okay, the logistics of the bullet hitting that, where's it going to go? What's the best type of round to be using for this? So churches are made of weird material typically, unless you're out in the country and maybe you have like a steel building or something like that. It's kind of hard to pinpoint. Shooting at a paper target, and I've said this before, shooting at a paper target is great for target practice, but for being realistic and understanding the dynamics of how that round is going to handle it, or how it's going to hit or penetrate or do something to that material is not, obviously you're not going to get to the point of understanding and being able to understand, the damage it does or anything else. So
I want to jump on that because you made a really good point that I didn't even think to bring up, which is bullets do weird things when they hit obstructions. And so I'm going to hit this at 100 miles an hour. And everybody needs, if you're watching at home and playing the home game, go research this. Don't get right up next to a car like they do in Hollywood and lean up on the car and shoot. Don't do that. Bullets will skip off the hood and smack you in the noggin. And you can actually use that to your advantage. Don't hug a wall going down a hallway, because even drywall rounds will skip off the wall and they will hum. And I've heard 4 and I've heard 6 inches. In my experience, to me, it seems like it's about 4 inches. I've seen guys do tests where they take balloons and they put them against a stone wall. They put them, and a stone has undulations in it. It'll do weird things. But something that's fairly smooth, like concrete or brick, it'll actually hum along it, and it's still got a lot of velocity. And so if the wall's over here and your head or your torso's within that, hugging that wall too close can cause it to hit you, but you can use that to your advantage. So if the bad guys are around the corner, and by the way, these things throw up chips in your face too, so you can get hit with shrapnel. Now you're bleeding, you get blood in this eye. Now this eye's got a sympathetic reflex, now you can't see. So different objects will actually let you skip rounds. Bad guy hides behind a car. If you can skip about 8 feet, some people say 6 feet, about 8 feet out in front of the vehicle, and you have some kind of pavement, the round will actually fly up underneath the car. And if they're laying down underneath it, or if you can shoot something that you can see, or you can guess about where it is and you can't see it, you can actually put a round in the guy. And he's like, ow, and then he falls. And like they have those targets where it falls into place, and you can shoot the other target. You can actually hit the person. So certain types of calibers, and to your point, it'd be amazing to spend an afternoon somewhere safe that had some walls that we could actually do this stuff with, because there's so many things that can work to your advantage. It's like playing pool. If you know what the ball's going to do, you can win in an environment where you would normally win. So I'm literally out of ammo, pun intended. Back to you.
Right. Well, the only thing at this particular point, the only thing I can say is let's close in prayer and I don't know, go to sleep, go to bed.
You ran us long. Do you want me to do it?
Sure, go for it.
All right, let's do this. And you won't get to watch me pray for extra seconds because there's almost no lag.
Yeah.
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord God, I thank you for everyone that was watching this tonight, especially the ones that stayed and went the distance with us on this. For anyone that will ever see this, Lord God, I ask that you bless our churches, that you guide us, that you help us to be the leaders and the servants and the safety team members that we need to be, that we're ministry first, that you would guide us, Lord God, that you would angelically protect our church bodies. You would help us to be very, very smart. We can't train too much, Lord God, for a job that can kill us. And I ask that you'd bring opportunities into all of our lives for affordable training, for friendships, for opportunities where we can learn, Lord God. It's a journey. We want to be there for the people that we are there to protect. We want to be their sheepdogs. We want to do the ministry that you called us to. And Lord God, I think of Jack Wilson, Lord God, if he had not from the 90s, even before that, being military, being reserve law enforcement and training from the 90s at least on, he wouldn't have been able to have the skills that would have been able to make that shot, Lord God. I think of Psalms 144:1. I praise the Lord my God who trains my hands for war. So tonight, Lord God, I lift up my brothers and sisters in Christ who protect the flock, and I thank you that you train our hands for war. In your Son, Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. I'm going to jump out.
All right. We will see you guys next week. Take care. God bless.